Okay, zoning board, we are live. We are recording. Phone lines are open. Go for it.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome everyone to the Town of East Hampton Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for March 5th, 2024. We have one canceled public hearing this evening and two scheduled public hearings. The canceled public hearing is applicant is John Latito at 35 Flamingo Avenue in Montauk, Suffolk Tax Map number 300-16-2-40. Our first scheduled public hearing is Brett Lascalzo at 149 Mulford Lane in Amagansett, Suffolk Tax Map number 300-84-2-7. The size and location is 6,629 square feet at 149 Mulford Lane, Amagansett. The description is to construct 160 square foot of first-story additions and outdoor shower to a one-story residence, reconstruct an existing deck, raise the first floor elevation by 5 feet, and install a new helical pile foundation on a parcel of land containing wetlands, duneland, and beach vegetation. The relief sought is a natural resources special permit pursuant to 255-420 and variances from 255-430, minimum wetland setbacks, 255-1172D, relative height restriction of the town code and any other relief necessary. Variances of 51.3 feet, 31.3 feet are required to allow the closest of the additions and the outdoor shower to be located 48.7 feet and 68.5 feet respectively from wetlands where a 100-foot setback is required, and to allow land clearing to remain within 3 feet of wetlands where a 50-foot setback is required. 3 variances are required to allow the residence to extend 9.5 feet, 10.5 feet, and 3.5 feet beyond the relative height restriction along the southern, northern, and eastern lot lines respectively. The zoning district is A residence, AE flood zone, elevation 10, and the seeker class is type 2. And council, do we have proper affidavit of service and posting? And where is she? Is council? There. Give it a sec. We're waiting for our counsel. You know where she went, Brian? I thought so too.
I thought so too. I guess she slipped away.
Ever slip out?
Oh, she's.
But I do have a copy.
No, we need to wait for council. Where is? Shit. No, we can't. We're, I don't.
I didn't put on makeup.
What?
Camera.
Sorry, everyone. I have to do a little bit of coordination with someone outside.
Council, we've read Lascalzo into the record. We're
Thank you.
finding out if there's proper affidavit of service and posting.
Good question. This is a continuation, and was the,
We did do mailing and posting again, and I brought a copy, but I believe our assistant forwarded the original.
What? It's a continuation. There was no, it was posted.
I have reviewed the affidavit of service and posting. It appears everything is in order and the board has jurisdiction over this application.
Thank you. We have member Meering to present the report.
Thank you. And I also want to say I was not a member of this board when the first part of the hearing was, but I have gone back and watched the entirety of the public hearing and of course, come up to speed on the file. So this is the view of the lot and the residence from Mulford. If you zoom in a little more, there is a board for posting, but there was no posting on the board. So I don't know if what the issues would be with the continuation, but it was not posted when I was on the site.
I do have a photo, part of their affidavit, just to interrupt, there is a photo of the posting, so I don't know if the board wants, we can add this as part of the record.
Council, I was at the property too. The posting must have come down in the weather and it was under a rock, but it
Oh,
was in
okay.
pieces, but I did see one.
Okay.
I think we should proceed.
Yeah.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just a little bit closer up of the front of the house with the area that I think is now the porch on the front and the steps. Next slide. I just turned my back to the house just to show this is exactly across the street. Next slide. Just a quick neighborhood shot. This is looking south down Mulford. Next slide. And then also sort of neighborhood that is the beach end. That's very close to the house, looking north with the stilt house in the background. Next slide. And basically standing in the same spot on top of that beach or road end, looking east. Next slide. Okay, now I've gone onto the property. This is the southern side yard, looking west. Next slide. Oh, and before you go, sorry, you can see the shower on the side and the steps, and that would be the side of the house where the extension or the addition is planned to be. Next slide. Okay, I've gone to the rear of the property. This is the rear yard of the property. You can see the cleared state and the lawn. And you can see there's a fence towards the background with wetland vegetation behind it. Next slide. I just got closer to the fence so you could see more clearly what's on one side of the fence versus the other. Next slide. Okay, and I've turned my back to that fence. This is the rear of the house, and I guess that this is the area also where the part of the septic system will be installed, and I'm looking straight down the northern side yard towards the east. Next slide. A closer look at that northern side yard, the tanks and the AC condenser. And next slide. Okay. And I've just come to the corner. I stepped actually onto the neighboring property to get another look at the house and the neighbor to the south. Next slide, which I think is the last one. And then I just also wanted to show this is the neighbor to the north, which is the last property onto the water, before the water. There might be one more, Brian. Oh yeah, and that, again, this is the house, the neighbor to the south. I think that's it.
Thank you. We have the agent. Thank you. Come on up. Yep.
Okay. Good evening, Chairperson and board members. I'm Deborah Choron of Matthews, Kirst, Cooley, and Choron, here representing Brett Lascalzo, the owner of 149 Mulford Lane. I appreciated the opportunity to make a presentation to the board in late November, and we took your comments to heart and made a resubmission last week. And our resubmission included three main things. We have a revised revegetation plan prepared by North Bar Property Management dated February 15th, 2024, which includes revegetation using native species in the amount that the planning department was seeking, which is the amount of 2,000 square feet. So that revegetation is carefully designed to still permit the new IA system and also to preserve the specimen tree in the backyard, which we're hoping we can still do. An expert report prepared by David Rhodes of TF Engineering, dated February 27th, 2024, includes a thorough analysis of the property and confirms that the location of the proposed improved sanitary system is in the most conforming location to achieve our shared goals for this site. A construction protocol was also prepared by Paul DeLandro of DeLandro Andrews Engineering, dated February 26th of 2024, which serves as an outline for the proposed construction to minimize any potential adverse impacts to the surrounding areas. So the planning department's chief concern had been the proximity of the new IA system to the wetland. And I've always taken David Rhodes, our expert, at his word that the proposed layout was the most complying location to achieve the goals of both Suffolk County and the town of East Hampton. In case there was any doubt, David did an amazing job putting together a detailed report showing his thoughts on paper. So he essentially prepared renderings of what it would look like if he tried to design the system in the front yard or either of the side yards. And even at a quick glance of those renderings, it explains, I think, why David settled on the proposed location and why the proposed location is not only most compliant with the law, but it also achieves the shared goal of minimizing the impact to the wetland. And so David is here to field any questions about that, but I can also get into it a little bit if you have any questions. So for this application, it's once again worth highlighting that with the granting of this application, the property will remain well within its permitted gross floor area, within its lot coverage, its total lot coverage, and clearing. And we also note that the applicant is offering this significant revegetation to bring the existing dwelling in compliance with FEMA and to install that upgraded IA system, which I think we all really want. So it's also worth highlighting from a legal perspective that the pre-existing non-conforming structure's degree of non-conformity with relation to the wetland is not going to be exacerbated. So in other words, with the small addition we're asking for, we're not getting closer to the wetland. So it's not going on that side of the house. And again, it's a minor 160 square foot addition.
Can you do me a favor? Can you just reiterate the list of conformities that you listed? You said this lot is conforming.
Oh, sure. Gross floor area, lot coverage, total lot coverage, and clearing. So we're not asking for any variances with relation to those like big picture items. We're here because the entire property is within natural resources special permit jurisdiction. So any construction we're doing on this property would require us to come before you. So even if we were just looking to put in, the new IA system, do some construction work that triggered a building permit, we would be before you. So if you look at it in terms of that, we have a 160 square foot addition to a really small house, and we're coming in with FEMA compliance, re-veg, and a new IA system. So, the fact of what we're asking for really doesn't actually change the legal theory of this matter, because the fact of the addition and the location of the addition doesn't change where we could put the septic.
But in the issue of the clearing, you're saying that it's conforming to clearing.
Yes.
But in the TAM, they're referring to an additional 2,000 square foot of clearing. Now, if it's in an NRSP jurisdiction and that was cleared without an NRSP, I'm not sure we can leap to that conclusion that it's conforming.
So right now, as it sits, it's not over-cleared. We're offering to remediate what the prior owner had done. So we did concede that point, hearing your concerns and the planning department's concerns. So we're now offering that 2,000 square feet of revegetation. That was in our submission last week. So I hope that that rounds out the application for you and addresses your concerns, because I truly see this application as a net benefit to not just the property itself, but the surrounding area.
Are you done?
Yes, if you have any questions, I'm happy. David is probably best to answer some of them, but I'm happy to try.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions
Sure.
based on the building protocol that was
Sure.
provided. On page, this is 5, in one of the first paragraphs, it says additional off-site parking will be coordinated and provided to keep the minimum disturbance to the area. It's a narrow road. We know how sensitive it is. We know how much damage can be done. My question is, how is that going to be provided? You've said it will be provided. Is there going to be some parking area off-site? What do you have in
So
mind?
typically that envisions that the company responsible for bringing work and materials to the site will coordinate so that employees are not bringing their own vehicles. So they'll coordinate coming and going from the site. And that would be expected. We wouldn't be able to line up cars on Mulford Lane.
Because naturally during construction, this is what does happen, obviously for carpenters. So if we see these, sometimes there's a plan put in place that at a reasonable distance, there's going to be some sort of carpooling and or busing. You don't have that. You're just going to rely on the builder to see that we have the minimum number of people there.
So it was broadly addressed, but I can see the concern. So that's definitely our intent with that sentence.
Right.
But in my experience, when somebody has had an issue, a neighbor or code enforcement has had an issue, they see my name on the application, they give me a call, and we make sure to remedy that really quickly.
See, that could become a potential problem. Just a couple other points on the building protocol. Maybe this is going to be a little technical for you, but there's this talk about cribbing will be located inside the footprint of the building as it's lifted, but then there's the idea of an excavation taking place and pilings, helical pilings being drilled. It's a small spot. There seems to be a bit of a conflict there. It seems to me the cribbing would have to go outside the footprint. Somebody can answer that, but I do see a conflict with this very small area trying to get as many helical piles as you're trying to put in. Even with the small piece of equipment that you specify in the protocol, it's something for us to be concerned. And then it says the demolition will be taken care of by small tools and be taken out. We're going to be looking that there'll be no debris to the west of the house here, because that is obviously closer to the wetlands. So we want to look for some sort of notation in here that says that all removal of debris, removal of construction material is going to happen to the east. There's no reason to go to the back, and we're not going to be looking forward to that as being a long-term potential problem. I already said something about the helicals. The breakaway walls, I'm just wondering, I see the notation of breakaway walls. I couldn't see that there was a sketch telling me what the material is. I'm assuming those are wooden breakaway walls. The lower level has a storage area, it's 4 doors and a window, 4 windows and a door rather. And so it has the potential to be fairly well built to support that. The nature of that breakaway system should be a note about that. What are we really looking for there on that? And then lastly, on the building protocol, I think this is something about, storing the materials. Now, the photos made it very obvious, Member Mearing's photos, what a small lot it is. We've all visited the lot. We can see that. If we're not going to be looking forward to putting materials to the rear of the house, close to the wetlands, we're going to have a very strict area. And it says small amounts will come as needed. We know what it's like to build a house. It's difficult to do. Very tight spot. It's going to have to be a designated area where all materials go. Now, it says that many materials will be stored under the house once the helicals are in place. I get that, but still, I think that I'd want to see that delineated a little bit here if we're going to move forward, because I think what happens here, and we've seen it happen on other sites, that we give these approvals and then we see material being stored well beyond where we gave the approvals for. With something here in writing that lets us know that all the work's going to take place from the east, all the demolition, all that removal there, so that we don't, find out that somebody arbitrarily starts storing a lot of equipment in the back, material in the back, debris in the back while it's waiting to be removed. There was a notation here about the dumpsters. The dumpster's going to be tight anyway. It's going to reduce your amount of parking. this is a difficult spot for you to coordinate logistically to come and go. So because the community will have that concern, it's something we look at from the NRSP point of view. In the protocol, while they were dressed, it wasn't specific enough to tell us exactly what was happening. So I would say going through the building protocol, for me, those were areas that jumped out. Most of the other areas there that we'd have questions about, I think there were answers, and I think there was a suggestion that it wants to be done properly. But I do think we care about that. And then in the re-veg plan, my only note is that I don't know how much time our planners have had to look at it, but that material list of materials that are planned to be planted gets fully approved by the planners before we move forward with it. I'm not going to comment about what the content was, but looking it over, I'd want to make sure that they were happy with that. And then I think that the analysis on the OWTS, the IAOWTS, is fairly thorough, right? Because we're looking at all three sides of the house. We'll get some input on the planners on this, but this is still one of those sites that we have to be extraordinarily careful about. If this is to move forward, obviously the two areas for me of the greatest concern, one will be the protocols, but where is the septic going and what is the actually best thing to do if it's going to happen? And I think we have to consider a little bit what the impact is going to be on the community when we go to the FEMA compliant height and what this pyramid, and I'll let the other board members comment on that, but the increased pyramid is necessitated by the compliance to FEMA, but nonetheless, it has an effect on the surrounding neighborhood. So those areas, when you look at this very sensitive site, that jump out at me. And I'll let the other board members make comment.
May I? Yeah. Thank you. But I just want to clarify first on the GFA additions and making sure that I've got them right. There's 3 areas that are hatched on the survey. The biggest one is on the southern side, right? That's the main addition. But can I just double check the one that's on the front of the property? Is that the closing in of there's like an existing porch, right? So is that closing in or are you actually extending further beyond that space?
No, my understanding is that if you see on the survey, the bird's eye view, the existing deck is still going to be deck. And the 3 areas that are hatched in, yes, those will be habitable space. And all 3 together total the number we've been discussing. But the habitable space does not extend over that large rectangle. That would be deck.
Okay. And then I do want to drill down a bit on the pyramid also. So I just want to make sure the existing house is already pre-existing non-conforming to pyramid, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then you're raising the house, so that increases the pyramid issue, right?
Right.
But how much of the pyramid increase is as a result, if any, of the addition on the southern side of the house?
If you look at it, it would probably be just the hatched area. That's the greatest concern. I believe that's where it's already encroaching and that's where it will be exacerbated. I would have to circle back with the architect and get that number for you. I know we submitted the architect's calculation of the increase in the degree of nonconformity maybe a year ago at this point. I didn't bring that with me, so it may already be in the file, but I can bring that.
Okay. And also on the re-veg plan, and I'll be obviously wanting to hear what the planning department says, so I'm not going to go into the materials, but one of the things that I believe came out in the first part of the hearing was it was the clearing as well as fill and excavation that had happened, and there was a discussion there about restoring contours and the topography related to the wetlands. But is that a part of the re-veg plan, or is that anywhere being proposed?
So we would be open to that discussion working with the planning department. The fact is that I don't think the planning department, nor I, nor my client have a topographical map of what could have been. I really can't say with any certainty that fill was placed there or that what kind of fill. I think it looks like lawn. So did they level it? Maybe. So we obviously have the intent to revegetate, restore that area. Even our first iteration of this application included that. Now we're just offering more. So with regard to species or what the contours would look like, we would be open to that because that's not going to end up being an area of the backyard that will be of much use to the homeowner. So that's something we're happy to take under advisement.
well, I'll let my other board members.
I'm
chime in.
more concerned about the impact on the environmental part of this. So obviously, we're looking at, number one, you're trying to make resiliency, but we have to balance out whether or not the new impact on this property will benefit the environment, because this is a highly susceptible and sensitive property. It's known that it is sensitive. Even in one of the photos, it looks like there's sand from it's blown up from recent storms. That I understand part of the resiliency part of this, but we have to weigh whether or not the benefit of this application is going to benefit the environment, and I'm not sure if I'm hearing that nexus yet.
So right now,
How is it benefiting the environment and the sensitivity of the property?
So right now, we have a cesspool that's within 20 feet of the wetland. That's what's existing today. And you have a homeowner who's entitled to keep it there forever and ever and to continue living there. And I don't believe that it's failing, but I don't believe it's in very good shape, and I don't think it should stay there. So when the planning department asked us to consider an upgraded septic system, we happily obliged and got this application together. To me, that makes a tremendous impact on the wetland. This house, it's a constitutionally protected property right that this homeowner owns this home, owns this property, and is entitled to continue using it. So I think we should do the best by the environment and put what's new and modern in the ground where the effluent comes out, and it's essentially closer to water than what a cesspool would be. So right now we have a cesspool that's very, very close to the wetland. We'd be putting an IA system pretty much around the same area. Basically, the only other option when you look at Mr. Rhodes' plan that he came up with when he was considering where the septic system could go, with or without what we're asking for, right? So with or without the fact of the addition, the only other location that was kind of a contender, put the house within 9 feet of the wetland. And so if you put the house within 9 feet of the wetland, the disturbance to the wetland is going to be so much greater because you're going to be digging, you're going to be pile driving, and you're going to be pouring concrete, which could potentially change the pH of the wetland. So for us, we're very confident that this is the layout that benefits this site, and we're very, very confident that it will benefit from revegetation. So, those two things. And then for the FEMA compliance and the pyramid, it's already, besides the fact that it's already within the pyramid line, or I guess outside of the pyramid line, preventing an applicant from bringing their home into compliance with a federal law is not necessarily within the purview of this board. So the fact of the addition and FEMA compliance doesn't change that we're going to be asking for that. So if we didn't have the addition and we were coming up with, in height to comply with the federal law, we would be still asking for essentially the same relief.
Thank you. Anybody else?
There was one discussion about the septic, if it were to be approved, on the original location where the expansion, that I believe Mr. Rhodes was, that said you could push the septic unit closer to the house.
Yes, and
gain about 5 feet further from the wetlands.
Yes, so he realized that in the middle of the last hearing, so the septic report does show that. So we did find 5 more feet to move it back. It's not expected that, I guess you would need another pool, but David Rhodes can speak to that much better.
Okay. But all right, you didn't update the survey, though. It still shows it.
No, we're kind of waiting to see how this goes.
I guess, can I follow up on that? So on the septic and, the presentation of all the different permutations, and, the house gets closer and closer and into the wetlands, obviously,
Right.
in one of them. But I do remember in the again, I keep referring to the first part of the hearing, a few members suggested that the board's not here to redesign the project, but I think there was a recommendation or a suggestion that perhaps a reconfiguration of the house structure where you're putting your expansion might have to go. That did not seem to be necessarily considered in rethinking the position of the septic. And I don't know enough to say if, if that side yard, that southern side yard still could have been used in some way.
If you look at that report, it shows precisely those thoughts. It shows the septic of if you tried to put it on the side, if you tried to put it under the driveway, if you tried to put it in the front. So that's exactly what those renderings were meant to do.
But I thought it still showed the addition in the place that you have it on the survey, as opposed to being put
Right,
somewhere
so
else.
David can speak to that, but my understanding is the fact of the addition in that location does not change any of those renderings. If that addition came off of that rendering of the home, it wouldn't change how the layout and the separation between side yards, backyards, front yards at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't know, could he show us that?
Sure.
I think I'd like
Dave, you want to come on up? How are you, Dave?
David Rhodes with TF Engineering.
Dave, do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Could you rephrase the question?
I guess I wanted to show the render, if you could show us the render.
Yeah, I guess the question I asked is all the interesting variations that you provided in the septic options set of schematics. But I don't think I saw one that, and again, I'm not trying to redesign that house for you, but it had come up, that the bedroom addition on the southern side. And I think in all of the options you show, it remains in the place where it is right now, as opposed to reconfiguring the additions to the
Correct,
house.
yes,
So I just didn't know if you'd considered that.
Yeah, Brian, can you put up the exhibits? Do you have those?
I didn't bring those, no.
Oh, okay.
We were going to be looking at that comparison on the screen.
Okay.
We have them. We all
You have them, okay. Right, so the addition is pretty small and kind of centered in the middle, so it doesn't really affect the west side or the east side of the house, and the septic systems have to be offset from the outside of the house, so that's why Deborah's saying it really doesn't matter on that addition, because that's not the most outlying part of the houses that would be set back from the septic system.
Dave, are there bedrooms being added in this?
I don't think so, no.
Not according to, not the floor plan, doesn't show
Okay.
that.
It says proposed bedroom number 3.
Right. Was it a 3-bedroom house before?
Is it a 3-bedroom house now?
I don't have that information right now. It's on our other plan, so. So, so just kind of going through, if you want to go through the exhibits, I'll take you through the exhibits. So if we look at the first exhibit on C1, that exhibit assumes that the house is staying in the current location that it is. And it does include the minor addition, because I wanted to analyze it without that addition in there. And the only location that meets the health department standards is on the west side of the house. So that's why we showed it. That's what we've always proposed. That's what the health department has approved at this point. The second exhibit, Brian had talked about what would happen if we went away from the PSD and went towards a leaching pool or leaching galley. You can see, in order to meet county standards, that layout pretty much takes up the entire property. There's really no room. Not only that, it brings up the retaining wall 3 feet along where the driveway is. Now you can't get up from the road up. So then the 3 and 4 on there. Now, as you can see, this would put the septic system in the front, but it's going to push the house back. And so we're 9 feet away and we're 1 foot away. Our issue with that, and why we didn't even consider that, is because the amount of disruption to construct a house within 9 feet of a wetland, pouring, helical piles, doing helical piles, pouring grade beams and pile caps and all that concrete nearby, we think would be pretty disruptive all the way right up to the wetland. So it's, and then even when you're done, you've got 9 feet of buffer, after you're done. So it's the other approach. We got an IA system. It's going to be reducing the nitrogen down from about 50 milligrams per liter down to about 12. You also have this pressurized shallow drain field, which will also do another layer of treatment and reduce down the nitrogen even lower than that. So there would be 2 levels of treatment on this, the IA system plus the pressurized shallow drain field.
So it appears if I look at the first floor plan, if there is a proposed bedroom 3, it appears it is an added bedroom because of the notation of the walls. You can see the walls is being
Right, okay.
added. So where the existing is outlined by, the new is by shaded walls. So it appears that there is a bedroom being added.
The smallest septic system the county is going to allow us to propose is 3 bedrooms.
Yeah, I know, but again, we're looking at from an environmental standpoint, is there going to be an intensity of use and stuff like that? An adding of a bedroom, just like the health department looks at, it could be an intensity of use. So,
The septic system is a 3-bedroom?
Yes. Yeah, on a high groundwater, they do allow a 3-bedroom, but otherwise, they normally require you to have a 4-bedroom.
Okay. There is a bedroom being added.
Yeah.
It's 110 feet of the 160 feet addition.
okay, I have no questions.
No,
I have no
let's hear from
questions.
Brian.
I'm fine.
Brian?
Good evening, board members. Brian Frank.
Brian,
Planning
you swear
Department.
affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So just to review real quickly what some of the major issues or the primary issues were that we discussed at the hearing in November. There were 4 issues really. One was the clearing and filling of the wetland that occurred by all belief prior to the current owner's ownership of the property, almost certainly between 2016 and 2018. The concern about the location of the sanitary system, which the planning department maintains very strongly, and I'll get back to that in a moment. The driveway and retaining wall being proposed farther west in line with the house, which is arguably the most minor issue of the application, and that the deck on the eastern side of the property does appear that it had been enlarged since the 2012 certificate of occupancy, and is proposing to be reconstructed in that footprint. Largely, there was a time when all steps were exempted from setbacks, and because they started running the width of the deck, which is what you could see if you go back to Member Mearing's photo. And then when they're reconstructed, they're just perceived as part of the footprint. Now staircases are limited to be exempt from lot line setbacks, need to be no greater than 4 feet in width. But I do want to talk about this wetland because obviously I do think it's the most important part of the application, well, it's really the primary focus of why this needs a natural resources special permit and the wetland setback variances. This wetland is part of an extensive wetland that extends far to the west. We've seen it on other properties and other surveys, and the wetland is dynamic. We'll might even be talking about it later tonight, but it's a wetland that is periodically, if not more often, inundated by coastal overwash from Napeague Bay. There is elevations on the survey, so if you did want to use a baseline contour for restoring the conditions west of the house, you could use the survey on this application because you can see that the wetland itself is located parallel to the 3-foot contour line between 3 and 4 feet above sea level, which is pretty common for a lot of the groundwater fed wetlands that we have. There may be some variation in there depending on what the datum for sea level is used, whether that's NAVD or NGVD, but that's beside the point. You know, we're below 5 feet above sea level. In this case, we're below 4 feet above sea level, and that's typically where you get wetland vegetation. The properties of this wetland are changing. That was evident by an inspection that we had done on the neighboring property to the south relatively recently, where the dune vegetation, the area that had been characterized by beach grass, is transitioning over to more salt marsh species. There's more groundsel bush there, there's more Spartina patens there, and that's indicative of the tidal influence of Napeague Bay on this shoreline. I think it's also important to recognize that sea level is rising. There are various rates of projection for sea level rise. New York State adopted a model for projecting sea level rise in the Community Recovery and Resilience Act in 2017. And whether you use a conservative projection of sea level rise or something more moderate, this sanitary system right now has been designed to be 2 feet above the groundwater table, and it's not going to remain 2 feet above the groundwater table very long. The projected sea level rise for Long Island is between 8 inches and 30 inches by the 1950s, depending on whether you're using the lowest projection or the greatest projection. Some people say we should be erring on the part of the greater projections. That's kind of beside the point. The main issue here is that it's going to change. Even if you take the middle of the road, the moderate projections for the 2020, they projected a 6-inch rise in the water table. I've been doing this for a long time. I've reviewed a lot of applications. I can't think of a circumstance in the past where the zoning board has allowed a new sanitary system to go closer to a wetland, significantly closer, and this is significantly closer, than the existing system. And I think it's contrary to the natural resource special permit standards. And I think that contradiction is magnified by the fact that this is not a static wetland. We don't know, or we can't say with certainty, that this wetland is going to be, 10 years from now, pretty much what it is right now. The sanitary system in the back of the property here precludes reestablishing the contours that existed on the property before the current owner bought the property. And I respectfully have to offer that if this is the best that the application can do, then the application is probably a poor candidate for the additions to GFA that have been proposed. It's a modest house. It's about a little over a 700 square foot footprint on a 1-story, call it a cottage, call it a bungalow, but it would be irresponsible for the sanitary system to be anywhere other than the southern portion of the property or the eastern portion of the property. I don't see how you can reconcile protecting the wetland by putting a new system 12 feet away from a wetland that is very likely going to get wetter over the next 5 to 10 years and beyond. The area restoring those contours are important for attenuating the floodwaters, which is one of the most important ecosystem services that this wetland provides. And if you can't remove the fill that was placed there, you're limiting that wetland's ability to attenuate those floodwaters. Maybe this is a better candidate for the board just to evaluate complying with FEMA until, and quite frankly, have the applicant go back to the drawing board on the sanitary system and other ideas for residential improvements. I do think.
What did you mean by that? Because they're already, if they do raise to FEMA, we are increasing the nonconformity of the pyramid in height. So what did you just mean by that statement?
Well, whether the applicant goes forward, whether whether the applicant goes forward with anything that you give them or not, or looks to redesign the residence, it being an old non-compliant residence now, with a smaller footprint, in a way that allows a sanitary system to be located in the southern or eastern portion of the property is what I mean. I do want to talk about the health department standards a little bit. It's nothing that we tend to get into in a lot of detail here. It's not really black and white to say that this complies with the health department's standards. David is at least partially correct that this design does not require a variance from the Suffolk County Department of Health Services regulations for residential construction. The health department does not have minimum wetland setbacks. I do want to remind the board before we forget that the DEC permit for this project did not make any reference to the sanitary upgrade, and the sanitary upgrade was not shown on the DEC approved plans. But the regulations for siting a residential sanitary system are in the Suffolk County Sanitary Code, and in section 5-105 in page 10 of the regulation, there are two guiding principles for locating a sanitary system. Number one is to consider all factors carefully. The design professional is responsible to carefully consider the significance of the existing and proposed topography, soils. I'm going to skip over, well, I won't. Soils, locations of existing and proposed water supply wells, surface waters and wetlands, groundwater conditions, and the planned locations of other improvements. Number two is a superior site shall not be foregone. A disposal site available prior to development which is adequate for the installation of a disposal system which can conform to these standards or be more compliant with these standards than other potential disposal sites shall not be sacrificed to enhance the siting of other improvements being considered for the site. So my point is it's not black and white. Again, David is correct that the sanitary system does not need a variance from the health department. But I do think it's fair, considering those guiding principles for siting a waste disposal system, that a location closer to a wetland, especially a dynamic wetland than an existing system, is probably not in keeping in spirit with those design regulations. I do agree that the concept of locating the house, moving the whole house closer to the wetland, to get the sanitary system, in a different location, it is not a viable alternative, and I wouldn't encourage the applicant to spend any more time on that. I do want to kind of point out some issues with the revegetation plan, because although I'm happy to provide some guidance to Deborah, what we or anybody else, we can't have just an endless back and forth of going back and forth. So I think that any revegetation plan, the planning department estimate for what was cleared after 2016 was 2,300 square feet west of the improvements on the property. But any re-veg plan should have proposed contours. It should have the size of the plants that are going to be established, their spacing. The plan should be scalable. It should have the wetland boundary. And it should have, if it's going to include this design, then it should have the sanitary improvements. The species selection should be more brackish and should avoid plants like Pennsylvania sedge and hairgrass. Pennsylvania sedge especially is a very, very diminutive plant. At its maturity, it's about 8 inches. And that is not what we see out here in this wetland, and that really doesn't provide the type of vegetative coverage that we're looking for in restoring the site conditions. So I want to acknowledge the applicant's effort and intention, but the plan that was submitted doesn't have a lot of the stuff that I just listed to you. So again, I'm just going to close with saying that I don't think a sanitary system 12 feet from a dynamic wetland is in keeping with the town code permit standards or the recommendations of the coastal assessment and resiliency plan that was adopted and incorporated into the comprehensive plan very recently. And if this is the best the applicant can do, then I do think the board has to give very serious consideration to denying the additions and leave the sanitary system where it is. Granted, it's a cesspool within groundwater. Leave it where it is until a superior design can be developed.
In the area that is apparently been regraded, what do you suggest to do with that?
That topsoil and the lawn should come out. It should be pulled to the east. It should be regraded out. You strip that topsoil. It's probably the native sand underneath it. Contour it as best you can to match the contours on the survey, maybe minus without that little 5-foot high spot there, and plant it with a combination of coastal brackish species. There can be some grasses in there, but it really should be more, what we see in and adjacent to a wetland like this is groundsel-bush, switchgrass. Could probably even use, well, those are the two best. A little bit beach grass, beach grass as you get farther away from the wetland is not unreasonable. But these are really pioneer species that are adapted to the dynamic and harsh conditions of a high marsh area and the droughty conditions that you get at low tide.
In your mind, I mean, the town in adopting its IA system replacement and code was to deal with the existing conditions of our wetlands and coastlines and stuff like that, in the conditions that they're in. Was the intent of it in any way to allow septic systems to move closer to wetlands?
I don't think I have seen that anywhere in the regulations, and I think more refined, the purpose of the IA regulations countywide were to raise the bar on what waste, on-site waste disposal consisted of, which is basically primary sewage treatment. Everything goes into a tank. The solids settle out and are retained in the tank. Liquid effluent is distributed in a waste field. But there's no biological or secondary treatment, and that's what these IA systems provide. The target was largely nitrogen because that has been identified as a major pollutant for both surface and groundwaters. But obviously, there are other pollutants in sanitary effluent other than nitrogen, but that I think is probably my best attempt to characterize the IA legislation that the town adopted.
Any questions?
Yeah, follow up on the septic and the issue of a potential variance from the health department. I know I read the narrative again about why the belief is that the septic is in the best place possible, and it talks about because it doesn't need a variance, and there seems to be a hesitation to even try to seek a variance. And I know that the applicant has said that they are not likely to be granted, but I wanted to get your take. Should we expect that an applicant will try, for a variance when the septic system is being otherwise proposed to be this close, to wetlands? Is it, or
yes, if there aren't any other conforming designs, then they conceivably could take the denial of the sanitary location to the health department and use that as part of their variance application and say, no, the town doesn't want us putting a sanitary system 12 feet from a wetland.
And lastly, may I ask, with respect to the septic system, I think I remember one of the early narratives that the applicant in, I guess, 2018 first came with a small insulation of the front, that front porch area, and that was it. And then the planning department suggested they should consider an upgrade. But now we have, I know it's not a big project, but it's a more substantial project. So is the septic system now mitigation, or given the extent of all the work being done, is it required?
Well, I can't think of too many circumstances over the years where the zoning board has allowed a house to increase its GFA with, a very substandard septic system without a septic upgrade. And I think we would agree that a single cesspool is a severely substandard system. So I think there are times when if somebody already had a conventional 5-pool system and it was a modest increase in GFA, and the tanks and leach and field seemed sized for the number of bedrooms, that upgrade might not have been required because it would be a lot of work for very little return. But that's why I think the board has to consider this application respectfully without an increase in GFA, because I don't think they have demonstrated the ability to adequately mitigate that with the sanitary system.
So I guess what I was getting at is, I know there's certain levels of development which become substantial, which it's like a 50% number that then requires, right, a septic upgrade. So, and then you can't really consider it mitigation, it's because it's required. So that's what the distinction I was just trying to understand, if we're at that level. I mean, I know it's an environmental benefit to have a septic.
If you're asking if this septic upgrade would be required, if this just by the GFA increase alone, by code, without it being required by the zoning board, if this were somewhere on an interior property outside of NRSP jurisdiction.
Plus all the other work, the value of the other work going in.
Well, that's the answer. That one of those triggers would be if it.
From a glance, and I don't want to get into it. This is more of a building inspector's purview, but I mean, raising a house to FEMA on a tiny little cottage like this, and they're doing addition, seems pretty much substantial to me. To probably pierce at 50%, but again, that's not for us to decide.
And the town's rebate program was established to help encourage these replacements, when they're not compulsory, and that's, something that this property would be eligible for under different circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to have one more question, just kind of follow up on the same thing. One of the points made by the applicant's representative, TF Engineering, was that they were going to be decreasing the amount of nitrogen going into potentially the wetlands by 80%. And when we look at, for us to determine what are we doing that's a net benefit or a net negative to the environment, is the new system, in your mind, I know you've already said it, I know, but I just want to get this clear, because you just said that you wouldn't mind, you'd rather see the existing cesspool stay there than the new system. So in your mind, the new system must be more potentially destructive to environmental conditions on the site than what exists there now.
Well, I think that the way I'd be most comfortable putting it is the effectiveness of the new system is going to decrease over time. As the groundwater table rises, as this area gets potentially inundated more frequently and flooded more frequently, the benefit of that will diminish. And you're not going to be able to restore the violation, for lack of a better word, condition on the property with the sanitary system in that location. You just won't be able to reestablish the contours if you're putting a leaching field there.
So your point is that the effectiveness is going to deteriorate over a period of time, and so will no longer be the advantage we think it is now, right? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And there'll be other opportunities to, I should say, be other opportunities to replace the sanitary system in conjunction with a different application.
But one last thing is that we did get these 4 takes on what you could do with the septic system, and 2 of them included moving the house. And you were very clear that moving the house is not one of our options here. Moving a house closer to the wetlands doesn't make any sense to us.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Brian? Thank you, Brian. Are there any comments from the public? Anybody like to address this application? Are you, Joe?
Good evening.
Introduce yourself.
Joe Karpinski, Bayview Avenue.
Do you swear firm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I always do. Just since I wrote in for this meeting already, I figured I would make a comment on it again. Since this area is next to wetlands and it also is adjacent to Nat Peak State Park, that is a bird conservation area under the SAS report of 2010. That's state areas of statewide significance. That should trigger policy 24, which should also possibly be with Department of State. The DEC won't reach out to those other entities, so I was just curious. And since the maybe Mr. Rhodes or perhaps the agent could answer that, if you guys have reached out or have any contact with them, and they should be notified since it is their area and it is a bird conservation area. So that's all I have to say. And as always, like I'm against anything that's being built towards the wetlands, and I think that we should protect the wetlands at all costs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Council?
Okay, thank you so much. So I just want to,
Let's just, Matt, is there anybody on the phone?
You have 0 calls on the line. Thank you.
all right.
Thank you, guys.
Good. Okay. So I just wanted to zoom out for a second and talk a little bit about two things. How this board actually now acts as a little bit of helping bring this property into compliance, and what could potentially happen in the future if we don't get an application that we can all agree on. So right now, the mechanism for this property to come into compliance is basically coming before you, and you have your wish list items of new septic, re-veg, and FEMA compliance. If we don't bring an application here, there's no existing violation, and we just continue with the existing conditions. And what happens next is we have a cesspool that was probably original to this home that will eventually fail. It's not failing yet, but we're going to have a septic fail this close to the wetlands. And what's going to happen then is we're going to bring an emergency application to build a septic, and it's going to go exactly where we're proposing it tonight, because the house won't have moved and we'll need to get a septic into the ground, and that will get approved. So we're thrilled to offer this now as part of this application, but what is going to play out in the future is what we're doing tonight. We've now shown that the only alternatives for this septic under town law and the Suffolk County Department of Health Services is to either move the house back into the wetland or to place it where we've proposed. And I was expecting Brian Frank to maybe even advocate for, because I know he's not thrilled about the location of the septic. I was expecting him to potentially advocate for the house moving back. I wasn't quite sure. But if he's saying not that, then there's only this. There is no other alternative here. So that's why I would really urge you to think about this application as a net benefit, because we're getting ahead of really a bad situation with a cesspool there. And I just wanted to also mention, I think it was mistaken, but we did get that new system at 16.82 feet, so almost 17 feet away. The current system's really only 10 feet more. So it's an IA system or a cesspool 10 feet more, which I think common sense and science and our experts and Suffolk County Department of Health Services, frankly, agrees that this is better. There's no standard by Suffolk County for the distance from the wetland because they believe so much in these systems and they don't see it as a disturbance. So for that reason, I'd really urge you to consider that. In terms of Brian discussing sea level rise, that's why we're asking for FEMA compliance. That's no secret. So we don't want an old home to rot there. We need to lift it up and make sure it's secure. So these are things that the applicant has committed to, 5 years in the process with experts and plans and trying to do right by the town and the community. And I truly believe that this application does that. So I hope that you do look at those renderings by David Rhodes and agree with our analysis there, because at a certain point, it will become inevitable whether we're before this board or not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's, okay, I think we close it out.
Yep.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Oh. I don't know if this is relevant.
Oh, yeah, you're going to have to come to the podium. You have to introduce yourself.
Steve Odesser, Bayview Avenue.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. So I don't know if this comment's relevant at all, but someone had asked earlier if there are people on the phone. My wife is on the Zoom, and I believe there are other people on the Zoom. Someone had said no. I'm just clarifying.
Matt, is there anybody on Zoom?
You have 0 calls on the line and no participants other than the board. Thank you.
Getting texts from my wife regularly talking about what's happening.
application.
It's not about this issue anyway.
Oh, it's for the next.
It's for the next, it's for the next
Next
hearing.
application, then that doesn't,
It doesn't
that
apply.
doesn't apply.
It was relevant. I just wanted to
All
clarify.
right, we'll get to the next one.
Okay, ready?
Thank you.
Okay, so in the matter of Brett Lascalzo, 149 Mulford Lane, Amagansett, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 300-084-0207, I make a motion to close the hearing and close the record.
I second that.
I concur.
I concur.
I concur. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Our next hearing this evening is, the applicant is 117 BBA LLC, 117 Bayview Avenue in Amagansett, Suffolk Tax Map Number 300-84-1-3.1. The size and location is 20,223 square feet at 117 Bayview Avenue, Hollymere Section A, lots 40 through 52, Amagansett. The description is to demolish an existing 1- and 2-story residence and sanitary system and construct a 1,885 square foot 2-story residence with approximately 1,172 square foot of decking, 1,216 square foot of pavers, a sanitary system and driveway, and to construct roughly 108 linear feet of rock revetment erosion control structure on a parcel of land containing tidal and freshwater wetlands, beaches, and surface waters. The relief sought is a natural resources special permit pursuant to 255-420 and variances from 255-385 coastal erosion overlay district regulations, 255-440 minimum wetland setbacks, 255-1172 pyramid setbacks, 255-1110 table 3 of the town code, and any other relief necessary. The following 8 variances are required for this application. A variance is required to construct a coastal erosion structure where the construction of a new erosion control structure is prohibited. 2 and 3 variances are 70.6 feet and 82.1 feet are required. To construct a residence and decking, 29.4 feet and 17.9 feet respectively from wetlands where a 100-foot setback is required. For a 96-foot variance is required to install the sanitary system 4 foot from wetlands where 150-foot setback is required. 5 and 6 variances are required of 6 foot and 1.75 feet are required to allow the residence to exceed the relative height pyramid limitation from the western and southern lot lines respectively. 7, a 3.5-foot variance is required to allow the residence to extend at 28.5 above natural grade is identified by the applicant where 25 feet is the maximum permitted for a flat-roofed structure. 8, an estimated 1-foot variance is required to allow the deck to be constructed 14 feet from the western rear yard lot line where a 15-foot setback is required. And 9, a 98-foot variance required to construct a PVC retaining wall as close as 2 foot from the wetlands where a 100-foot setback is required. The zoning district is A residence, AE flood zone, elevation 10, and the secret class is unlisted. And council, do we have affidavit of service and posting?
I've reviewed the affidavit of service and posting. Everything appears to be in order, and the board has jurisdiction over this application.
Thank you. Just a matter of a little bit of housekeeping here. The applicant, the agent to the applicant has submitted an opposition to a member, Jane Maring, being participant in this hearing. As a result, that member has gone before the Ethics Board to seek a determination. That Ethics Board recently just brought back a determination that she is allowed and she is wishing to participate, and therefore we're going to allow her to participate. Thank you. We then go to the field report. And I think,
Yeah.
Member
I
Johan.
did the bill report. This is a photo of the posting. Next. Then I looked my way back up here on Bayview Avenue. I'm looking back up to the south. Next. I've looked over my shoulder behind me. This is a house that's immediately to the east. It's on the waterfront. There'll be another shot of it later. Next. I've looked up. This is the continuation of Bayview Avenue. It's grown in at this point. You'll see some other photos at the far end. This is Bayview Avenue over my right shoulder as I'm standing by the gate. Next. This is the gate into the property itself. Next. Now we're just standing inside the gate, and you can see some of the cleared area. This has been referenced in the TAM about how much of a parking space there is, and we can talk about that later, but you can see some of this, and it's going to go off to its left. Next. I've turned myself a little bit to the left. You can see the parking space as it goes out. You can see a bit of a retention there between that and the wetlands that you can obviously see in the distance. Next. I got a little closer just so you can see the transition from the parking area to sand to the wetlands beyond. Extensive wetlands, as was already been referenced. Next. Again, I've just turned myself a little bit. I'm working a little bit further to the west. I've been looking south. This is west, and you can see the Phragmites growing right up against the parking area. Next. Now from that far corner of the parking, and you can see some sandy area, I'm looking at the existing residence, the house as it exists now. Next. I've moved myself up, and I've gone off to the east side of the house, and I'm looking due east, and this is the house you saw a minute ago when I was standing at the gate to the driveway. Next. I'm walking up on the east side of the house, and there's an entry to it with the sound beyond. Next. Now I've turned my way and looked back again. This is on the south side of the house. My back is to the east. I'm looking west. I can see the extensive marsh beyond the developed area. Next. Now I've marked my way down along the east side of the house. I've got my back to the water, and I'm looking back at the existing residence. You can see how it's set right now, pretty much directly in both the dunescape and the wetlands beyond. Next. Now I've just stopped from that spot. You can see in the far left a little corner of that deck, but you can see here where the water comes up right to the edge of the bluff, and we'll take a look at the geocubes in a minute. Next. Now I've turned and looked to the right. Now that's the house we're seeing for a third time. It's the house directly to the east, and we can see beyond that houses on Mulford Lane, which is about a quarter mile away. Next. From that corner, I'm in the northwest corner of the property. I'm looking back at the existing house and deck. Next. Now I work my way down off of the property. I'm looking back at the house from someplace along the beach to the east. You can see the geocubes that were installed. They'll be in discussion. They have been in discussion. This property's been before us in the past. But you can see the house beyond, and you can see what the geocubes are doing, what the purpose was when they were installed. Next. I've got a little bit closer, and this was just an indication of where the water is breaking now on the cubes. The cubes had, it's been referenced in the TAM, that there was sand protecting the cubes that has long been washed away. Next. That's just a repetitive shot. Next. That's me looking down at the bottom of the cubes. I see the cubes standing on cubes that are buried, some filter cloth there. Give you an idea of the structure of what we're looking at out there at the retaining wall. Next. Again, there's a little more of an exposure of the lower level. Two runs sitting on top of a third one that's buried down into the sand. Next. And I've come back up to the deck, and I'm looking out, give you an idea of the juxtaposition to the open water from the house itself and its deck. Next. I'm looking off directly to the west. Again, we see that the wetland does project. It's been well described and discussed before, but described in the TAM as coming down. This is all to the west. There's a significant amount of marshland and wetland in that area. Next. Just making a little turn now from where I was. I've just looked a little bit. Again, you can see how extensive and important these wetlands are going to be in our discussion. Next. Now I've just gone back out to the road just to take a look at what's happened here at the end of Bayview Avenue. This is the path down to the road from Bayview Avenue. This is off of the property for the applicant. Next. And I walk my way out. These are the geocubes that sit at the end of Bayview Avenue. Next. And from that area off of the property looking back, I'm standing now on the adjacent, I'm standing right at the end of Bayview Avenue. I'm looking back at the house. I think that might be it. Is that it? Oh, that's just some of the geocubes I'm looking straight down on that are at the end of the avenue there. Next. And that's the neighboring house from that area. That's the house. That's the fourth time we're seeing it. It's the house immediately to the east. Next.
That's the last one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Brian Matthews, Curse, Cooley, and Choron, here on behalf of the applicant, 117 Bayview Avenue, LLC. I'm joined tonight by the members of that LLC, Nick Greco and Diana Hines. They're the owners of the property, and I note at the outset that the property has been continually owned by Nick and his family since the 1970s. We're also joined tonight by a number of experts and consultants, each of whom have submitted plans, reports to the extensive record that's already before the board, and they're here to answer any questions that have been raised by the planning department, any questions that the board may have. We have Aram Tertunian from First Coastal Corporation, Dr. Lee Wisher, senior scientist at the Woods Hole Group, Sean Buckner from Delandro Andrews Engineering, Chris Gaddy from Montauk Design Solutions, and David Rhodes and Ethan Zaweski from TF Engineering. And I also note that there are a couple of reports in the record from Dr. Mark Burns, principal coastal scientist from Applied Coastal, who was unfortunately unable to be here this evening. Thank you, Member Johan, for that extensive report also. I feel it's important to note at the outset that the number of experts that the applicant is bringing before you today is not by any means to overwhelm or come over the top of the board or the planning department, but it's instead indicative of how seriously the applicant takes this board's responsibility of balancing the applicant's right and ability to protect their property and the protection of the environment at the same time. They've engaged these experts to prove that what they're proposing meets this balance and allow them to do what is necessary to adequately protect their home and their property in the most environmentally sensitive approach possible. As the board knows, and was stated in the notice, collectively, without breaking down all the individual variances in this application, the applicant is seeking to do three principal things, and NRSP and variances are required. Demolish the existing residence and construct a new residence significantly more landward and in a more conforming location. Install an IA, nitrogen-reducing sanitary system, to replace an old, out-of-date leaching pool system, and to construct a stone armor revetment, an erosion control structure that every expert that is appearing in this matter on behalf of the applicant has concluded is necessary to protect the property and the improvements from severe and ongoing erosion that's impacted this property and this area as a whole. And, while I'm sure there's going to be some discussion about the septic in the house, it's, quite obviously the revetment that's going to be the principal point of discussion. So a couple of items I think are necessary to point out. The severe and ongoing erosion is diminishing the beach, has diminished the beach in front of this property every day. It's bared out in the record that over 180 feet of beach has been lost in the last 40 years seaward of this property. That figure should be alarming. It is 180 feet in the last 40 years. That fact is borne out by the aerials that the applicant has submitted, and even the aerials submitted by the planning department. I think they were uploaded on Friday or yesterday. The town itself, on a number of applications here and in the surrounding area, has noted that has long recognized the well-documented history of erosion in this area, and that this particular area is one of the most severely flood and erosion-prone areas of the town, with the barrier dune eroding at a rate of over 3 to 4 feet a year. The erosion in this area is so severe that standalone properties both on Bayview and on Mulford that used to exist seaward of the ocean, the bayfront properties there now, have been lost entirely. All of these facts are irrefutable, and they must be we ask that they be front and center at all times during the board's deliberation of this application. I do want to note that, we submitted an extensive memorandum of law prior to the January hearing that was ultimately canceled, that covers a great deal of topics, including the variance and NRSP standards. We refer you to those. We can answer any questions, but I'm not going to get into those specifics in too much detail tonight. But there are a few other facts I think I need to bring to the forefront here again. The applicant has spent years, from 2011 through 2017 in particular, putting sand in front of their property in the hopes that it would stem the tide. Those efforts failed year after year after year, a fact that is well documented, as our experts can attest to. The applicant then sought approval from this board to relocate the residents landward without a revetment. In 2019, that application was denied. As the erosion continued, the applicant and their neighbor at 114 Bayview Avenue were forced to obtain emergency building permits to install the geocube wall that presently exists today. As the applicant's experts have each attested to, it is only this wall that has protected the applicant's property and their residents from succumbing to the erosion that has taken so many other properties and residents that existed previously. So I want to take a moment. Member Johan adeptly pointed out that the geocubes are going to be a topic of discussion, so let's talk about them. I expect them to be a major point of contention by the board and the neighbors. To be clear, the applicant wants the geocube wall removed as much, if not more than anybody, more than the town and more than the neighbors. This is by no means a circumstance of the applicant dragging their feet, happy with the status quo that the geocube wall presents. It is for this reason that they've proposed to remove this geocube wall as part of this application. It is for this reason that while the applicant waited and waited for this application to be processed and heard, that they filed applications with this board and with the building department to modify that geocube wall, to take out the middle part that was on Bayview Avenue and create returns and open up Bayview Avenue. Neither of those applications were acted upon by this board or the building department. Of course, the town board did find time to adopt a resolution threatening our clients to have them unilaterally removed. The emergency permit for the geocubes only allows them to remain for a 9-month period. The fact of the matter is, as everyone who spent more than any time in this room knows, 9 months is nothing. It's not enough time to get a standard setback application heard, let alone something as substantive as a permanent erosion control solution for a property like this. As shown by the fact that this application was initially filed in May of 2021. Now it's March of 2024, and we're finally here for our hearing. So while the geocubes remain in place past the time frame, that is technically permitted by those permits, the fact that they remain is reflective of the time it takes to get here. It's not the fault of the applicant they remain in place. It's certainly not their fault that they remain across Bayview Avenue for the reasons I stated. Time and again, they asked to have applications heard and decided to modify that wall and open it up. Given these circumstances, we submit that every member of this board, every member of the planning staff, every member who's here tonight watching on TV would do the exact same thing. If it was your property facing daily inundation, severe, constant, ongoing erosion, if you watch the houses down the block from you get washed out to shore, if you watch the beach in front of you get diminished to such a degree, you would do the exact same thing. You would act like a reasonably prudent property owner. You would leave those geocubes in place until your permanent solution application was heard and decided. I think it's important to note that the concept of leaving temporary erosion control structures in place is something that the town itself is familiar with, certainly now. While the Fire Island to Montauk project 60 years in the making, finally brought roughly 450 cubic yards of sand to downtown Montauk. The sandbags that were in place, I think, were in place for roughly 8 years. Where would those hotel owners be? Where would downtown Montauk be if those bags were removed before that work was done? Here, the town has no grand coordinated plan to protect this area of beach and to protect these property owners. In this instance, in this area, property owners are on their own. Nobody's bringing erosion control relief to 117 Bayview Avenue except for the applicant in the form of immediate surrender of a 30% reduction of their property by moving the revetment further landward and retreat of the house. So I want to turn back to the application itself quickly. The applicant is again asking to demolish the existing residence and strategically retreat 78 feet landward for a house that is less than 10% larger in GFA. At its present location, the house is not sustainable. They're looking to replace the existing leaching pool system with a new IA system and relocate that further landward. The new system requires retaining walls and elevation of a drain field in order to obtain the 2-foot separation. From our review of the EAF and the planning department's review, they have agreed that the IA system is located in the best possible area. The experts agree, and they need to, finally, to protect all these improvements and protect their property, install a coastal erosion structure in the form of the engineered rock revetment that are relocated 35 feet landward from where the existing geocubes are presently. So, again, the memo of law details why all these are required and how these meet the standards. So before turning the podium over, there's 2 issues I want to address: SECRA and the local waterfront revitalization program. First, SECRA. As this board knows, council knows, any action taken by this board is subject to SECRA. SECRA is governed by very strict procedural requirements that, respectfully, none of which were complied with in the processing of this application. SECRA terminations are, by law, required to be made as early as possible. The reviewing agency is required to take a hard look, identify and review areas of legitimate environmental concern as early as possible in an application process. That did not happen here. Instead of taking action as early as possible, upon receiving an application in May of 2021, nothing happened, aside from the threat to remove the geocubes by the town board this past summer. The town did nothing on this application until the applicant was forced to commence a litigation in October of 2023, 2.5 years after the application was filed.
Brian, when did the EAF Part 1 get filed?
The EAF Part 1 got filed in January.
This January.
It was never asked for. Nothing ever was received on this application, substantively, to review this application. Until a mandamus action brought under Article 78 was filed by the applicant against the town in October of this past year, mandating to review, pick up, review this application and present a technical analysis memorandum and allowing us to get to this point. Even then, despite a stipulation of settlement being signed, saying the TAM would be prepared and provided, the town instead produced an EAF, asking that a POS deck be adopted and a DIS be required. To be sure, planning department is keenly aware of the difference between a TAM and an EAF requesting a POS deck. Again, if this was your property, I suggest that none of you would be happy about how your property and your property rights were being treated. Not only has the town failed to meet the procedural requirements of SECRA, but its substantive requirements as well, as there's no rational justification to adopt a POS deck and require a DIS on this one-off application. First, it ignores the circumstances our client's home and property face. Erosion over 3 to 4 feet a year. It ignores the fact that soft solutions have been tried and failed for over a decade. It ignores the fact that the geocubes are well past their useful life, and a report to that effect has already been submitted to the record. It ignores the fact that every expert appearing for the applicant has repeatedly stated that a hard solution, hard revetment, is the only way to do this. Adopting a POS deck and requiring a DIS does not further any goal of SECRA or the town code for that matter. The town knows full well what impacts there are, if any, of installing revetments along this coastline, as the board reviewed a number of them, some of which have been granted, some of which have not. DES is not required to identify or mitigate any impacts. As the experts will discuss, all of the impacts have been identified, and all of the mitigation has been presented by them. The only goal a POSDEC and a DEIS serves is to further delay our client's application and delay their ability to improve and protect their property. It should also be made clear that if a POSDEC is required, adopted, and a DEIS required, the other result is that the geocubes won't be removed. They're not going to, an applicant, as would properly, I think, not going to expose their property to being washed away while a scoping process is done, while a DEIS is done, while an FEIS is done. Leaving the bags in place won't make anyone happy, the town, the applicants, or the neighbors, however. But make no mistake, they would remain. The better and proper path forward we would submit, given the fact that all secret questions have already been answered, given the length of time it took to get here, given the very real threat to their home and their property, is to adopt a negative declaration, as was done on the Young property 2 properties over. If, however, the board is disinclined to adopt a straight negative declaration, there's another avenue that we put in our memorandum of law that we submit is a proper way forward here, equitably and legally. And that is the adoption of a conditioned negative declaration. And we won't get into what that entails. It's in our submission, but that allows the board to have coordinated review, to discuss this matter with the DEC, to make sure that any impacts that the board believes may be associated with this are addressed and mitigated. Again, equitably and legally, we think that's the best way to go. So the last item I want to address is the LWRP. In the AF, the planning department just makes the conclusory claim that it's not consistent. That's not enough, however. First, it states the existing revetment is not consistent. Well, there is no existing revetment. There's the geocubes that are being removed. But even if they're referring to the proposed revetment, the planning department under section 150-30B of the town code, 150-50D of the town code, has an obligation to present to the applicant alternatives that would allow the application to be consistent. That's not been done. So if the planning department's going to insist that this is not consistent, they have an obligation to come forward and say how it would be. We welcome that discussion because all other alternatives have either failed, been explored, and they're not feasible. So right now I want to turn it over to our first expert, Aaron Tertunian, unless there's any questions from me. But again, the threats facing our client's property, they're very real. And the time to allow them to do something to protect it is now. Thank you. Aaron?
How you doing, Aaron?
Good to see you.
Introduce yourself.
Aram Tertunian, First Coastal, West Hampton Beach, New York, on behalf of the applicant.
Thanks. Aaron, do you swear affirm, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I have some photos that Brian's going to put up on the screen, and I'm going to give you some handouts that you can keep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I had 2 here. There are 2, okay. We'll go into the record, so.
You need one more?
Sorry. Brian, if we go to the other aerial photo, please. Would be 84. No, yeah, that's right. The first thing that I'd like to bring to the board's attention has to do with the source of erosion and accelerated erosion here. Obviously, erosion is a natural process, occurs all the time. But there are circumstances where erosion can be accelerated, and that's what's happening on this site. So this is a 1984 aerial photo that I downloaded from the Suffolk County GIS. And just for some orientation, on the left side, you'll see 117 Bayview is identified, as well as Mulford Lane. And then in the center of the photo, you can see that I've indicated a number of groins that are there in 1984. And then on the far right, you can see where the inlet is to Napeague Pond. The purpose of this photo is to show you, if you look closely, and it's probably easier to see on the handouts, the Suffolk County tax map lines are indicated for each of the parcels. And if you look close, you can see that the shoreline is more or less consistent with that tax map boundary in 1984. On the certainly in front of Mulford and Bayview, on the west side or the downdrift side of the groins, and on the right side or the opposite side of the groins, you can see the shorelines just slightly seaward of where that tax map boundary is. And I just want you to get that for a reference, and then move to the next slide, please. So this is a 2023 aerial photo of the same area. I've identified the same features again: 117 Bayview, Mulford Lane, and the inlet to Napeague Pond. And I've also indicated on there in the large red arrow the direction of sand transport. Now you can see much more clearly in the center of the photos a series of 7 groins that are there. And if you remember from the previous photo, those groins are mostly covered in 1984, but now you can see that they're exposed. But what's even more striking is that on the left side or the west side, the area that's shaded in red is all the land that was lost between 1984 and 2023. And that is the accelerated erosion that this property and other properties in the area are experiencing, and it's directly tied to these groins. So I just wanted to set that into the board's understanding as we attempt to adapt to this artificial condition created by the groins. Now, I have another series of aerials.
I think the question in our mind, Aram, is are you adapting to it or will you exacerbate it?
Okay.
You know, that should be addressed.
Okay. I like that.
Two sets.
One more.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Brian, if we could go back to the 1962 set, please. Yeah, one of those tabs, that's it. Okay, there's 11 slides here, and I won't spend time explaining everyone in detail. You have it in front of you. You can explain it at your leisure. But what I want to point out here is that in TAM, there's an indication that the existing geocube structure is causing overwash and sedimentation into the marsh, and that's harmful to the marsh. Oops. And my colleague, Dr. Wisher, will talk about marsh formations and that stuff in a moment. But I just want to walk you through these slides so that you can get a clear understanding that the overwash process that's occurring across this entire shoreline has been occurring since 1962 and long before, and up into the present, and by all indications is not actually being exacerbated by the structure in place. So this is a 62 aerial. I've identified 117 Bayview, I've identified Mulford, and also I've identified 2 locations on here that show up as very white, that is sand. And that is sand, you can see these are what are called overwash fans. And that's simply because when the storm comes, it's full of sand. It washes over top of the low dunes that are characteristic of the Napeague shoreline, and it spreads sand landward in a fan-type motion. These photos were taken after the 62 storm, which some of you may remember, I happened to be living in downtown Montauk in the 62 storm. So I remember it, although I was quite young, I must say. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in this one, I've identified, again, 117 Bayview. There's a slight problem with the registration on the Suffolk County GIS. All of these photos were downloaded from the Suffolk County GIS. Actually, today, you can see the date stamp in the lower left corner. Again, I'm pointing out here these overwash features. I mean, there are no houses on Bayview, yet overwash is occurring across large portions of the shoreline, all indicated by this bright white. The dark is obviously vegetation, and the different shades of dark indicate different vegetation, but the white indicates sand, and sand comes from overwash from the bay. Next one, please. And so here we are in 1984, and you can see the modest home that was built there. And I've indicated, it's about 200 feet from the house to the shoreline. You've got to think if you're building a house and you build it 200 feet away, that's reasonably prudent. But this area, as I expressed, is accelerating in erosion. Next one, please. Here again, I have identified 117 Mulford. I've identified, 117 Bayview. I've identified Mulford. I've identified the frag-dominated marsh, both to the southwest and then across Bayview on the eastern side. But you can also see there are more of, now these photos are getting better as technology gets better, and you can see with the color that active overwash area that's just to the west of 117 Bayview. The house is 200 feet away. Nothing's causing that except for nature. Next one, please. Okay, here we are in 2004, and we're seeing, again, active overwash areas, all on the west side of the residence. The residence is now only about 70 feet away. So incredible, 140 feet of erosion between these two photos, between the 84 photo and this photo. You can see overwashes occurring also to the east of the residence. That's on the east side of Bayview. This is a natural process. It's been going on since sea level started rising 18,000 years ago. Next slide, please. Here we are in 07. Now the area has shrunk to about 50 feet of difference. If you look closely, you can actually see the shadow of the scarp line where there's a distinct drop-off. And you can see that there's what I call an overwash scar. So the vegetation has started to regrow on top of that white sand that had overwashed. And that's on the west side of 117. But if you look at the east side of the house that's on the east side of Bayview, you can see that there's an active overwash occurring right there. No structures on this property or the adjacent property, overwash is occurring. Next slide, please. Here we are in 10. We're down to 50 feet of difference, of distance between the house and the erosional scarp, which is highlighted by that shadow line. And you can see active overwash is occurring both east and west of Bayview. Next slide, please. And this is 2013. Now we're down to about 20 feet. This is obviously post Superstorm Sandy. And you can see active overwashes occurring not just on east and west of Bayview, but far to the west of Bayview, that whole area that's in the state park. So that's a storm comes, you get a surge, you get heavy wave action, you get overwash. Next slide, please.
And your point in pointing out the overwash is what?
My point in pointing out the overwash is that it is a natural process that is occurring, that it is not being exacerbated by the structure that's in place. And as my colleague will explain, it's actually healthy for the marsh. But and I'm almost done, which is the good news. Again, we have a recovery of an overwash scar that's immediately west of 117 Bayview. Next one, please. And we're very close. Finished. But now you see the geocubes in place, and you do see an overwash right there, adjacent to it. It does occur. Don't doubt it. It's right there in the photo. But it's been occurring all along. Next slide, please. And then we get to 2023, and what do we see? Oh my goodness. The overwash is occurring hundreds of feet away from the structure. The structure is only 200 feet long. It doesn't have an effect hundreds of feet away. If it has any effect, it has an effect directly adjacent to it. And you can see here that these overwashes are occurring not just west of 117 in a broad area, hundreds of feet wide, but also occurring on the east side of Bayview, more or less in between the two sets of homes on Bayview and Mulford.
But are we seeing, regarding the overwash, but are we seeing an increase or a formation of scour happening in this photo?
What we're seeing is that the erosion has been halted in front of 117 Bayview and the adjacent house to the east, but is progressing at the background rate of erosion of 3 to 4 feet per year.
To your estimation, has the erosion always been at the rate, or has it accelerated at a certain point in time?
It began accelerating probably in the 80s. There's an excellent study by Dr. Mark Burns that I believe is in your file. I recommend you take a look at it. It's some excellent diagrams in there. And he breaks the erosion of this area into 3 cycles going back to the 1800s. And the acceleration of erosion from 2 feet a year to 4 feet a year initiates in 82, according to his study. And these photos seem to back that up.
Thank you.
So just because I believe in really nice pictures, I'm going to give you a couple more. I just want to see, this is what an overwash looks like. And this is again pretty west of 117. And the distance is substantial.
I know what overwash is. I know what overwash is.
And have to do completely with natural processes and not with anything associated with the geocubes. Brian, if you could just bring, that's the overwash slide. Yeah, that's the tab you had it. Yeah, that's it. So that's what it looks like. This is a natural process, as I said. The other thing I wanted to bring out was part of the proposal is to once the geocubes are removed and the revetment is constructed 35 feet landward of the present location, the object is to open up Bayview. And what we've proposed is to do basically a cobble walkway in that area, basically in Bayview. And there may be legal aspects of why this board cannot act on that, which were mentioned in the TAM. I'll leave that to the lawyers. My point is, in the TAM it says, cobble shouldn't be used here. Look at these photos. There's cobble all over this beach. You just got to go at low tide. And
21. Is that a projection?
Drop the knife.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at.
He's doing it for scale. But he put it there. Aaron, we're expecting,
come from?
we get the cobble, we get what cobble is, but we're expecting you to kind of make this presentation efficient here, and move on. So we get what cobble is.
I think, photos are
that was
great.
unnecessary,
These
but-
are
all right,
the
I get
actual samples I took from the beach.
Where are we? They won't fit in the
Oh,
file.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Can you pull up that other slide? With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Any questions?
You can.
No, thank you.
Okay.
No. Okay.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Lee Wisher. I'm from the Woods Hole Group, and I'm here representing the client.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Before I begin my presentation, I think I want to talk a little bit about marsh processes. Now, marshes have to grow in elevation to stay ahead of sea level rise. If they don't, they'll be drowned. And so a marsh can build through several processes. The first one is accumulated vegetation, where the vegetation dies off, the marsh plain vegetation dies off, and then is either incorporated into a peat layer, or if there is no peat layer, it will break down and then become basically mud. And then that mud becomes consolidated. And the breakdown process can take anywhere from years to decades. And so this process is very slow, and it cannot keep up with sea level rise. And that's why many marshes, both in New York and all over New England, are in the process of being drowned right now, and or in the process of being restored by adding sediment to those to raise the elevation artificially, actually. The second method is increasing the marsh plain elevation through storm and overwash process, of which Aaron presented quite a few slides. When a storm occurs, the incident wave surge transports sediment, over the beach into the marsh. And so the first evidence of that is the overwash fans that you see, which are readily apparent. But what you don't see is that beyond those fans, sand is transported into the interior of the marsh, and it actually helps raise the elevation of that marsh also, beyond the extent of the fan. The combination of those two processes helps the marsh survive and counteract sea level rise. These processes have been going on for a long period of time, as evidenced by Aram's aerial photographs, and they're long before the geocubes were ever installed. Additionally, as Aram showed, those processes are occurring both further to the east of the property and to the west of the property. Well, I could continue to go on at some length about marshes because of the fact that, not tooting my own horn, I'm somewhat of a marsh restoration specialist. I have helped rehabilitate over 200 acres of salt marsh in various locations. So I'll just go on and talk a little bit about beach nourishment. So basically, the property has placed sand on the beach since 1982. And since then, as I think Brian indicated, over 180 feet of beach and bluff have eroded. And every year, beginning in spring of 2011 through 2017, beach nourishment was placed on the beach, with the exception of 1 year, 2014. In general, the beach was nourished in the fall, and the beach nourishment was completely eroded along with additional bluff by the spring of the following year. The cycle of beach nourishment and erosion went on until the geocubes were installed. Prior to the installation of the geocubes, the applicant went to great lengths to attempt to arrest the erosion by using only beach nourishment at the property. The beach and bluff continued to erode despite the placement of sand on the beach. And the sequence of events of the continued erosion, even if the beach nourishment was placed on the beach, demonstrates that beach nourishment alone has not been effective and will not be effective at protecting the property. Additionally, speculating that a larger sand volume might, and I say might, have arrested the erosion, I think might be considered somewhat disingenuous based on the board's position concerning the overwashing into the adjacent marsh plain and the denial of additional sand that was requested previously during applications. So there has been some question about moving on about whether or not, what alternatives have been considered. So there are 8 different alternatives that were considered for this property. The first was just no action whatsoever, just leave everything in place. Leaving the geocubes in the house in place will not provide long-term protection to the house or the infrastructure. The geocubes are in the process of failing, and while they're still actively protecting the house, eventually they are going to fail because of the fact of UV radiation is starting to break them down, and they were only designed to be temporary. They weren't designed to be a long-term solution. Once they begin to fail, there will be erosion to the property, which will ultimately leave the house stranded, similar to the storms that were occurred in 2018. And I think looking to the east of the property, there's adequate evidence that once that starts to occur, the house will be stranded, at least if not on the shoreline, perhaps in the surf. The 2018 storm resulted in 19 plus feet erosion in one episode. And so if several of these storms occur, once the geocubes fail, then the house will be rendered uninhabitable. The second alternative was retreat only. So that would leave the geocubes in place and move the house landward. Moving the house landward will not slow the erosion by itself, and so therefore once the geocubes start to fail, the erosion will occur, the sand in front, behind the geocubes will erode, and again, leaving the house stranded eventually on the shore or in the surf zone. The third alternative was beach nourishment alone. I think it's pretty evident that the history of Sand Place has shown, both in the aerial photographs and the evidence that's been provided in the application, that beach nourishment will not be effective by itself in protecting the property. The fourth alternative, was an offshore breakwater. Now, offshore breakwaters might work well in this location. The following are several positive effects that the breakwater would have. It would reduce the wave energy at the shoreline. It would eliminate the reflected wave energy at the beach, and it would trap sand behind the breakwater, thus protecting the property. It would also provide long-term protection to the property. However, the offshore breakwater has several severe negative effects. It would potentially eliminate the littoral sand transport to the west. A tombolo would likely form from the breakwater, and a tombolo basically is sand which is accumulated behind the breakwater, attaching the sand from the shore to the breakwater. And the offshore breakwater would occupy a significant amount of benthic habitat. While an offshore breakwater could potentially be designed for this location, I think the negative effects of the breakwater outweigh any potential benefits for that as an alternative. The fifth alternative was rock-filled gabions. So gabions are basically rock-filled baskets where you have a basket that's similar.
I'm just going to ask you if we have your report.
This is not in my report.
Okay, but we're dealing with a lot of scenarios here that probably have no significance to this application. If they don't, I'm not sure. If they do have significance, I encourage you to move on, but if they don't, then I would say that.
There was a suggestion that we hadn't considered alternatives. And so I'm addressing the concerns that were put forward.
But those alternatives should be in. Go ahead. No, go ahead. No, scratch it.
So I only have a couple more and I'll be done.
Thank you.
So
We're up to 6.
So basically the rock-filled baskets where basically they're either made out of wire mesh or they're made out of geotextile. And basically both of those are designed as short-term protection. The wire baskets can degrade over time because they're metal wire, usually rubber coated or heavily galvanized, which will eventually break down. The geocubes basically break down under UV radiation. And once they fail, then the rocks are left stranded in the near shore zone and on the beach. And to repair the structure is not a simple matter. Sixth alternative was fiber rolls, and I think you all know what a fiber roll is. It's basically coconut fiber in a long tube. They're usually installed on a sloping bank, and they can reduce wave energy and to the property, and also reflected wave energy. The problem with them are similar to the others. They degrade with UV radiation. And they're not really designed to be subject to open wave attack. And so once they are subject to storm surge and wave attack, they become saturated, can be pulled out, and the fiber roll can weigh several hundreds of pounds once it's saturated, and they're not easy to remove from the nearshore environment because of the fact that I've actually had several projects where we've had to do that. The seventh was PEMs, and those were installed to the east of the project. Just to cut to the chase on that, I've really never seen any evidence that PEMs have worked or resulted in significant accretion, so I would not consider that. And the eighth and final alternative was the gray-green infrastructure, living shoreline solution. The gray solution is, of course, the rock revetment. The green is the sand cover and beach nourishment proposed. The sand cap and advanced nourishment of the sand would be excavated from behind the geocubes and then reserved. The revetment pulled shoreward, I believe the toe would be 35 feet shoreward. Then once constructed, the sand would be placed over the top of the geocubes. Excuse me, I misspoke, over the revetment. And I want to point out that if the geocubes are left to fail, the sand that we're proposing to place over the revetment would be naturally available for transport into the littoral zone. So there's some positive impacts associated with the gray-green proposed structure. The sloping rock revetment would reduce the wave energy and runoff at the site. The sloping structure will reduce reflected wave energy. Tapering the turns at the structure along the placement of gravel and cobble at the ends of the structure will reduce potential scour. The proposed sand cap of native material will restore littoral sediments that would naturally be available as sediment transport if there was no structure. The proposed project will restore public access from the beach from the upland to the beach, and will help reestablish the public access along the in front of the rock revetment and the sand cap. So eventually we realized that the sand cap would probably need to be replaced or augmented because of the fact it would be subject to erosion and that sediment would go into the littoral zone. And the cobble may, over time, after a severe storm, need to be regraded, but we don't anticipate that that cobble would be moved offshore or into the littoral zone. So with that, I think that I'll end my presentation. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to ask them.
I do not. He was very thorough.
No, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and board.
Good evening. Sean Buckner with Delandro Andrews Engineering.
And Sean, do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Yeah, so our firm predicted the wave forces, and then I inherently designed the revetment based on those forces. We did that utilizing up-to-date means and methods for predicting storms of different reoccurrence intervals, including 25-year and 50-year storms. Ultimately, we designed for the 25-year to balance protection of the client's property and acceptance by the town and your board. We utilized the Army Corps of Engineers Shore Protection Manual for the process to predict the storm and also design the revetment. We also used the direct integration method outlined by FEMA and many data points that correlate to this property that FEMA has outlined in their flood insurance studies. As mentioned, we designed for the 25-year storm, which drives the crest of the revetment to be at elevation 10 and the toe to be at negative elevation 4. This is driven by predicted depth of scour, overtopping, and expected height of waves during this 25-year storm. As seen on the cross-section and the plans, we have a toe stone of 3 tons. Our D50 stone is also 3 tons, and we utilize cantilevered sheet piles along the east and west property lines to protect the edge of the revetment, and I'll come back to touch on that a bit further. We feel this 25-year storm is prudent for the protection of this property and is really the minimum allowable. To put it in perspective, buildings under ASCE 7 for minimum design loads for structures, typically most of those loads are predicting a 100-year storm. So as mentioned, this 25-year storm is really the minimum, and with correct erosion and maintenance protocols, we think would do justice to the property. As mentioned, on the east and west property lines, just to respond to one of Brian's points from his most recent report from March 1st, we did not elect to turn the revetment 90 degrees and come landward with it, decreasing the amount of stone that needs to be brought to the site. Rather, we went with a vinyl sheet pile, which would be vibrated, not driven into the ground, to disrupt the wetlands, to limit the disruption of the wetlands as much as possible, and while also protecting the property from not just creating a barrier on the seaward property line, which without some kind of return would allow the erosion to come around and really sidestep the revetment altogether. That's all I have for you guys as a summary. If you guys have any questions.
I have one question. In your studies, in your design criteria, 25-year storm, whatever, did you study the effects of the neighboring property and what the structure would have on the neighbor properties?
I think Aram did an excellent job showing
Is that a study?
Sorry?
I'm looking for a study.
No, we don't have methods to look at the redirection of wave forces. We do feel that this area, as Aram had outlined, and the report that he referenced, has severe erosion already, and we feel that the delta, since it's already very severe, the delta due to this revetment would not be not noticeable, but would not create a huge delta because there's already a massive wave force.
So in 25, 30 years from now, we won't be back at this table talking about further erosion on neighbors' property.
I think there is going to be continued erosion, which has been seen in some of those photos. As the geocubes put up, the neighboring properties are already continuing to erode, but that's the nature of what has been going on since for a while, including from 1970, 1980.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I don't know if we talk about it now or later, but I would like to understand more about the cantilevered PVC retaining walls. I've read the documents and things, but just to summarize it, because they're called out, in the TAM. So I'm just trying to understand what they add.
Yeah, so the main thing...
I'm not being very technical, I'm sorry, but...
No, all good.
Yeah.
We wanted to return and protect the side properties, the east and west side of the property, so that when the erosion is mitigated by the revetment, it doesn't continue around the revetment and really sidestep the revetment altogether and start eating away at the applicant's property. So returning those south along the east and west property lines allow a return and would avoid that erosion around the side of the revetment itself.
So we've seen the photos, we've got quite a few of them to look at, and we're familiar with the groins that sit to the east of there, and we see the damage that was done immediately to the west of those groins over an extended period of time. The photos were evident of that. We allow for a hardened revetment that you're suggesting here. What do we do anticipate to the west there with continued erosion happens to the west? What kind of scouring, what kind of long-term damage do you anticipate as an engineer you see happening there?
Yeah, as mentioned, there's already a very extreme case of erosion and wave forces on this, stretch of shorefront. There's no way to, there's no method to look at what the redirection of wave forces would be. We did try to taper it as much as possible to not create a direct redirection of the forces towards the neighboring properties and really ease it. But we don't have an accurate way to directly say with confidence what the delta in erosion would be.
So the revetment wall, you commented in your presentation that was going to start at -4 and finish at +10.
Yes.
So we're talking about a 14-foot basically revetment. Is that correct?
Some of it is underground
Some of it's
to account
underground,
for
but
scour.
nonetheless, yeah. I don't mean it's 14 foot to grade, but I'm saying there's 14 foot of stone.
Right.
Now, how is that stabilized? Does that run back at such an angle to allow for a certain amount of wave action? How do you stabilize a 14-foot high stone wall? What's your technique in this case?
Yeah, there's a certain slope shown on the cross-section. I don't have that in front of me right now, but there's a certain width, and basically it comes down to the total weight of the stones per linear foot that allow this to withstand those wave forces.
So from your point of view, as an engineering formula that you're incorporating here to help protect the long term, because we're talking about a fair amount of stone here, right?
Yes.
And we're talking about a large structure. What keeps it stable? We've seen other structures like this have movement. They have to be regularly maintained. There's other aspects. There's a protocol about maintaining a revetment like this. So I'm going to look at that more carefully. I saw that there was an angle, but nonetheless, there's something that if this was to move forward, we'd want to know what is the potential for this, as the chair has mentioned, that's going to survive, that we're going to see that long term, we have a guest, long term, that it's something that's been thought out in a way that we can get behind, saying, well, this is a legitimate engineering feature that we can get behind. So it's our responsibility to examine what you've submitted. But I just wanted your testimony to say that you have looked at this and you're realizing, because when you start talking about 14 foot of stone, you're talking about a fair amount of resistance to wave action, and we have to talk about what's happening. It's not a very small feature. It's a significant feature. And that's going to call for, I think the kind of care and scrutiny that we have to give to it before we give any kind of go-ahead.
Yes. So we specify a certain slope, a geotextile that would be put down below the larger armor stones, and then the design of the stones itself, the D50, the weight per foot is all designed to that 25-year, and all of the calculations we did for scour, overtopping, and everything like that. Along with that, we also have outlined in the end of our report and calculation package an erosion control and maintenance plan. So if this was installed and left alone, I can't say with confidence it would last forever, but there is going to be periodic inspections and maintenance, whether that be bringing in some more of the fines that may have washed away, and upkeeping this revetment will allow it to have the longevity that we're looking for and that the applicant is looking for his property.
And then in terms of a protocol, the stone that you're going to be bringing in is going to be brought on through the property, the existing property.
Yes.
So we're not going to be being asked to allow it, or being asking the town to allow it to come along the beach from some other access.
Right.
So you come through the property, establish the revetment, and then move the house.
Right. Aram and First Coastal, I believe, put together a construction methodology that outlines the entire game plan on that.
Yeah, I've seen that. Okay, thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, guys.
Next. Do you have anybody else, or?
Well, we have Chris Gaddy from Montauk Design Solutions and TF Engineering, who designed the home and the septic respectively. If the board has any questions for them at the moment, we're happy to have them come up. Otherwise, we can have them address any questions that Brian have, that the public has, and we're happy to allow the hearing to move forward, hear from Brian, hear from the public, and what have you.
Yeah, I mean, that's I'm trying to move this along a little bit, but if you think it's necessary for them to come up?
I don't at the moment, no.
Okay, fine.
No, I
So
mean,
then
we're talking about the revetment primarily. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement about the septic or the house per se at the moment, so we're certainly happy at the moment to
Great.
allow.
So maybe we should turn this over to Brian, Frank. Thank you.
Hello again, board members. Brian Frank, Chief Environmental Analyst for the town of East Hampton, working out of the Planning Department.
We have a little guest.
Still sworn in, right?
Yeah, you already saw it in, Brian.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pardon me. I've become familiar with this area through the course of a variety of applications over a fairly long period of time. I visited this area either through the applications at Bayview Avenue or Mulford Lane, dating back many years. Application review, wetland delineation. I first became most familiar with this property in 2010 when I was asked to assist with the relocation of the septic systems that were at the time north of the house, and assist with some wetland mapping to help them get health department and DEC permits to move them on the south side of the property. So since that time, I've been out there numerous times. I'm probably the environmental professional that has spent the most amount of time out in that area. It doesn't make my observations gospel, but I hope they make them credible, because I have seen the changes that have occurred over the properties, especially since the geocubes have been installed. But before I go any further, I do want to remind the board that this application is an unlisted action pursuant to SECRA, and that's because an erosion control structure is a structure that neither falls on the SECRA's State Environmental Quality Review Act's Type 1 or Type 2 list, and structures or activities that don't clearly fall on either list are classified as unlisted actions. So the Planning Department recommend that the board seek to formally establish itself as the lead agency and determine if it wants to coordinate with other involved permitting agencies. The information that was in the EAF that was prepared in November has since been revised to a report dated in March, one step at a time, and that should be the document that you use to, review the Planning Department's comments at this time. I do believe, with respect to Mr. Matthews, there are 3 questions that are answered incorrectly in the EAF Part 1. The EAF Part 1, although it may seem superfluous, is part of the body of the decision-making that goes with SECRA, and it is important to have them revised accordingly. So respectfully, the statement in question 5 that the proposed action is permitted under zoning regulations, the answer was issued yes. The Planning Department believes the correct answer to that question is no. And whether the action is consistent with the comprehensive plan instead of non-applicable, that answer should be no as well. And 13B, would the proposed action physically alter or encroach into any existing wetland or water body? The Planning Department believes that, no, was checked no. That yes is the more correct answer there, and I can explain why in my presentation. So just as a formality, I think that Mr. Matthews should have the opportunity to revise the Part 1 accordingly. So this application has 2 elements to it. One is the residential redevelopment of the property, and the other is the permanent coastal erosion structure. I guess we should maybe keep our focus on the erosion control structure because that seems to be the primary area of focus. That's where a number of experts have come to testify before the board and submit their written reports. But with regard to the residential improvements, I do want to point out that the application is not, nor has it ever been in the past, to move the house. I think that might be a figure of speech or a slip of the tongue. I believe Brian referenced that in his early presentation, that an application to move the house back was denied in 2019. The application is to demolish the existing house and to construct a new house. Again, it never has been to take the existing house and slide it in a more landward location, an activity that is generally encouraged and is complicated on this property by the proximity of wetlands. By all rational measure, this property is on a filled wetland. It was filled prior to the environmental regulations that would have prohibited that. But as a result, there are wetlands located immediately adjacent to the western lot line and the southern lot line. You can see on the elevations, both on the applicant's survey as well as the town's GIS, elevations as low as 1 foot above sea level. So we're talking about an area, a very low area close to the marsh. We're also talking about an area that probably never had really a substantial dune in front of it. The shoreline was somewhat artificial when the fill was placed there, and I think that has to factor into the erosion rates that have been projected by Aram and Dr. Weischer, and I think that should be factored in accordingly. That shoreline north of the house, at least a portion of that, was never natural. This is the most recent survey, not never natural, has not been natural since the fill was placed in the 70s. This is the most recent survey that shows the improvements. You can see the location of the rock revetment in the shaded area here. You can see that the mean high water line was located back in 2021. It's really not accurate anymore. The water line, at least for the most part, is pretty much contiguous to the geocubes. And I have some photographs of, I have a lot of photographs. I'm going to spare you most of them tonight and just share the ones that I think are most pertinent to the discussion that shows the dynamic nature of the shoreline and shows how the structure that has been there has interacted with the shoreline. And I think it's fair to point out that we are not here to discuss the geocubes per se. We're talking about a rock revetment that is going to be about 30 feet landward of it. But this is what's here now in a dynamic environment. And I think the photos over the last few years are pretty illustrative, and I'd like to share them with you now.
Hey, Brian, what's the date on that survey? I can't read that.
Me too.
March 23rd, 2023. And I'm fairly confident that's the most recent survey. The most substantial revision of this survey to its predecessors is the sanitary system has been relocated from an area adjacent to the southern property line to a better location of the property. But I'm going to show you the shoreline changes here. I'm sorry, just give me a moment.
Here, I have it. You found it? Yeah, it's in the back of this. Yeah, okay. It's in there. Yeah, you have it? Yeah, sure.
So I kind of think for the moment we have seen enough aerials. The only one that I'm going to dwell on for a moment is 2007. It's the only one that I included topography on because our topography comes from 2006 LiDAR data. So these contours best align with the elevations on an adjacent to the property. And again, this is the 1 foot contour interval down here. This is a 1 foot contour here. Most of this is 2 feet above sea level. So again, this road end was naturally shouldered by two very low areas that are prone to inundation. But this is this is the geocubes under construction. This is from July 2018 when the structure was being built. This is 117 Bayview Avenue. This is the geocube freshly covered by fill in the summer. This is the geocube as soon as January. That was the next time I went back to the property. I don't know how long that fill cover lasted there, but it's evident that it was completely gone seaward of the geocubes by January. And again, you can see the sand cover here. This is the wetland. So there is some truth to the fact that coastal wetlands do get overwashed, and that is a natural cycle of things. But when they're bouncing, when you have end scour and you have waves interacting with a hard structure, you're exacerbating that, you're accelerating that. With respect to Dr. Weischer's comment that this is good and natural for the marsh, that is flatly incorrect. Or better than flatly incorrect, grossly oversimplified, I think is a more appropriate way to put it. Yes, marshes need to keep up with sea level rise, but episodic dumps of sand concentrated in a location like this, and you can tell this is the corner of the property, this is not benefiting the marsh. What it's doing is reducing, again, the capacity of this wetland to act as a sponge, to hold water for a prolonged period of time and let it seep out slowly. So that water has to go somewhere else when it gets into the marsh, and that does have the potential to impact Bayview Avenue and the properties south of here, as well as, we're not here talking about Mulford Avenue, but that is also the case on Mulford as well. This is in 2020, and you can see now by 2020, the bottom of the second course, the bottom course of the geocubes are exposed. I probably should have mentioned up here in these earlier photos, you can see they're about halfway exposed here. So what you'll see over time here is that the beach is lowering as the waves bounce off this structure, and you'll see this water line gradually creep closer to the geocubes over time, to where last year, I didn't try to go there at the deadest of low tide, but that might be the only time when the water line isn't right up against those structures. Just to come down to, again, this is in 2020. You can start seeing the top of the lowest level of the third course of the cubes. Again, more direct deposition right into the wetland. And this is in 2023. So if these cubes are 3 feet tall or a little bit less because they're going to be compacted by their weight and a little bit of water, this is at least a 3-foot drop in the beach, if not more. I don't want to exaggerate, but there has been a demonstrable adverse impact from the existing structure as it's interacted with the shoreline. And this, come on. This rack line kind of shows you a pretty good indication of where the water level is. So there is a proposal to construct a substantial rock revetment about 30 feet landward from where this structure is now, in an area that we all agree is. I think one of the questions that the board should fairly ask the applicant is, at what point do they expect that revetment to be permanently interacting with the shoreline? There is a proposal for a certain amount of fill cover. I believe it's 100 cubic yards a year. How long is that? Pardon me, how long is that material expected to last? And what can be done to prevent its rapid deposition directly into the wetland to the west. We have, if the beach lowering continues, there is a potential for Bayview Avenue itself to become a flood corridor. I'm glad I apologize for forgetting his name, the gentleman from DeLandro Engineers has basically acknowledged that the vinyl sheet pile retaining wall, which consists of 20 feet long sheets of pile that's going to be driven into the marsh or into the ground as close as a foot from the marsh, is basically an extension of the erosion control structure. And it's an extension of the revetment. And it's there because without it, you would have end scour, flank erosion that would wrap around the property. And I think that is just indicative of how dynamic an environment this is. And I think it's important to recognize a number of things. One, the legacy of these erosion control structures seems to last forever, because I've been doing this for a long time. We talk about jetties that were constructed over 100 years ago. Tonight we're talking about a groin field that was installed by private interest. Again, this is not a government action. This is before there were regulations that would limit it. But that groin field goes back to the 50s or 60s. That makes them 70 plus years old. The legacy of these structures just never seems to go away. And that's why a measured and calculated approach is required to thoroughly evaluate the impacts of them before they're approved and to reasonably exhaust alternatives. I could cite from the environmental assessment the sections of the code that apply to erosion control structures. They're detailed, they're specific. The standards for them are high for a reason. The importance of beaches are actually codified. The statement that Brian characterized as nonsensical in his memorandum is a direct quote of 255-415 in the benefit of beaches, where the code specifically calls them, I'm going to paraphrase unless you want to take it verbatim from the assessment, the town's most important resources, and their continued loss represents something incalculable in terms of its value. They're part of the cultural and economic identity of the town. There has clearly been a loss of access to the beach and along the beach as a result of this structure. How is that going to change from a permanent revetment on this property? How is Bayview Avenue not going to be a flood corridor if you have a hard structure wrapping around 117 Bayview Avenue? The proposal for cobble in the road right-of-way is going to result in a de facto rubble revetment there. You're going to put, if you put stone of the diameter that Aram laid on the podium up there, on that beach, mixed with sand, the sand is going to wash away. That stone is going to remain in an unnatural pile. If I could do it quickly, I'd go back to Aram's photo, but what you see there is a natural cobble beach. The cobble is dispersed, and among it is sand. And actually, what you can really see in that in that photo is the peat bog, the marsh that existed underneath the sand that was filled in this area. You could see that a fair distance out. You could also see that on the aerial photos. Our non-structural restoration regulations say that non-structural restoration is limited to sand of a compatible size. It does not allow for the provision of cobble of any dimensions. I'm going to stay out of the whole what you can do in the road right-of-way. Well, I shouldn't, because the end of Bayview Avenue is a private road. It's part of the old file map system. We call it the urban renewal map system. And making changes within the road right-of-way requires urban renewal map modifications. So the applicant's ability to install, to place fill, install cobble, clear the width of that, because as you saw in member Johan's photos, what has been there for as long as I'm aware, and I'm sure there are residents that could speak to it more precisely than I can, has been a footpath of varying width, but several feet wide, 3 to 5 feet wide through the marshes. The proposal to place fill in that road right-of-way would essentially remove that would clear that, raise that into a hump, and again, what you would end up with is a rubble mound revetment. That's almost certain. There are short-term impacts about how the revetment is going to be constructed without impacting the wetlands to the west. The revetment is basically a foot or two from the wetland to the west. The vinyl sheet pile, the same thing. I think if it was in DeLandro's report and I overlooked it, I don't know that there's mentioning of vibrating the sheet pile in. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a marine contractor, but in the permits that I've reviewed, many over the years, a lot of times people run into pile vibrating in vinyl, trying to vibrate it in. The vinyl cracks, you hit a stone, you can't vibrate through it. I don't know how feasible that's going to be. And if more excavation would be necessary. We don't have a lot of information about what the anchoring system is. I don't think there's any information. Is it just the depth of penetration that's going to hold that sheet pile up? There are areas where this is 7 feet above the ground. Adjacent to that, some places as low as 3. So they're proposing to drive it in as much as 17 feet into the ground and hope they can get it that deep if they're going to follow their plans. And there are areas where it would be about 11 feet or so above sea level and an exposure of 7 feet above grade. I think that there are a lot of questions about how this revetment can be constructed within the parameters that they have laid out. It's real easy to draw it up on paper, and I don't mean to be dismissive of the applicant's effort. They've clearly come here to try and answer these questions as best that they can. But I think there are some serious questions that remain, both for the short-term installation of this structure and its long-term interaction with its environment, including the wetland to the west. A hard structure on this property is going to unnaturally change that wetland to the west. It's going to do it rapidly, much more rapidly than a natural coastal overwash. I hope we can all at least agree on that much. I do want to say something about the secret process. The idea that the potential for additional analysis, if that involves an environmental impact statement, was discussed at length with the applicant in person in a meeting with the planning department, their attorney at the time, and the zoning board's attorney. It was after that meeting in June of 2022 that we were asked in writing to hold off on our review until they could do our best to discuss, to address the concerns that were discussed in that almost 2-hour meeting. That material was submitted in the spring in I believe late March of 2023, and the mandamus suit was not necessary to get this application to hearing, but that might be a subject for another day. But the prospect of the concerns of this application have been raised consistently going back to the earlier modifications of the geocube structure that the board had in this file. One of the applications that never received a decision from this board was an application to reconfigure the geocubes, in which there was an environmental assessment prepared by the planning department, and that application was withdrawn with the intent of replacing it with this application, something to address the reconstruction of the upland improvements and permanent shoreline stabilization, if I'm paraphrasing correctly. So there was a lot said by Mr. Matthew, Dr. Weischer, by Aram. I, rather than just try to rebut that in the interest of time, the public hasn't gone yet. I know there are a room full of people behind me. I don't want to give an incomplete presentation, but I also want to be respectful of the other people that haven't spoken and the board's time as well. So I'm just seeing if there's anything that, well, I think at this point, well, the other thing I'm going to point out, and I think it's a little bit of a contradiction, is, Brian has indicated in his memorandum that there have been no adverse impacts from the GeoCube retaining wall, but at the same time, I believe it was Dr. Burns who, and if I'm quoting the wrong doctor, I apologize, said that a sloped revetment is going to be greatly superior because an angled face allows for better run-up and less wave reflection, and I think that's true. But in the areas where we have rock revetments in town, we don't see a marked difference in the erosion seaward or adjacent to them from the properties that have vertical bulkheads. So that's a statement that if not tonight, at some point, I think needs a better qualification, because the notion that what's there is a vertical wall, what is going to go in is going to be sloped and won't have whatever impacts have occurred to date, I think is poorly substantiated, respectfully. And with that, I'd like to make myself available if the board members have any questions, and then yield the floor.
This time.
Well, other than, we've spent a lot of time talking about the revetment, and other than that, since we have you here, this is a full application. We're talking about, as you pointed out, the demolition of a house, a new house, septic. We have your TAM, and I see your reaction to it. Is there any other comment while we have you that you'd like to make about that aspect of the application?
With regard to the redevelopment of the property, it's the planning department's opinion, and this application is measurably better than the one that the zoning board denied in 2019. There is a nominal increase in building coverage. There is I have it here, I believe it's a slight increase in total coverage. I apologize, a slight decrease in
It's a decrease, I believe.
the gross floor area of the existing house is about, this says 1,600. I think we had 1,700 in some other documents, and the proposal is for just under 1,900 square feet. But I do think on a severely constrained property, and that's what this is. Again, I hope that's something that we can all agree on, that with a Napeague Bay along the northern shoreline and a wetland right up against the western and the southern property line, this is a severely constrained property that requires numerically substantial variances from our minimum wetlands setbacks. The planning department recommendation has consistently been to take the gross floor area without increasing it, consolidate it in a smaller footprint in a more southerly location on the property. I think the one unanswered question about the residential improvements is there does appear to be a retaining wall that runs along the southern property line. And while the design professionals from the applicant's team are here, there's really no indication if it's part of the vinyl sheet pile that runs along the western property line. It's clearly not associated with the new sanitary system location. So exactly what that is it concrete? Is it vinyl? Is it the same installation method? Because again, the elevations to the south of the property drop pretty close to sea level as well. We're talking only a couple of feet above sea level. So any wall in its elevation is going to be very visible from Bayview Avenue, and the composition of that structure and its purpose is something that should be identified by the applicant. So thank you for reminding me of that, Member Yo.
And the only other thing is that you have previously said that you believe that the proposed location for the septic system is probably in the best location on the property?
The planning department's recommendation was always to try to, the prior location was very close to the wetland to the south, about 5 or 10 feet from the wetland to the south, and it needed to be centralized better. I think, I'm not an expert in the urban renewal map system, what easements may or may not be required along the road there, and if the sanitary system could be located in that location, I think is something that is most likely going to be identified over the course of this application. But in terms of its natural resource, its general location is as good as it's going to get. If that, for whatever reason, had to move a little bit farther to the west for some reason, it's as good as you're going to get for the constraints of the property, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, I believe you probably addressed most of this, but to wrap up, kind of a question is, The design of the revetment, and all due respect to the engineers here and all that, they're highly a good firm. But did they adequately, from an environmental standpoint, they look like they concentrated on protecting the property? From an environmental standpoint, did they adequately address the environmental concerns both in the Townsend RSP and LWRP as it relates to this property and the adjoining properties?
No, and with respect, I expect the applicants to disagree with me, but that's not the purpose of the revetment. The revetment is not to protect the wetlands or the environment. It's to armor the property and protect the house, and that's you can try to, no pun intended, soften and make them sound a little more benign than they are. But ultimately, that's what erosion control structures do. They harden the shoreline at the expense of the resource to protect the improvements behind it in almost every case.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Yes, please. Brian, two things. Can you talk a little bit more about the potential impact of the retaining walls going deep down, basically into or right next to the wetlands? Sort of, it's number one. And number two, we talked a lot about the revetment, but I'm curious to understand there's still now a fair amount of space left between the north facade of the new house and the proposed top of the new created bluff. So I don't even know how to question this. I mean, is there a case to be made for this? If the revetment is going to take place, should it be retreated even further back towards the house?
Well, Member Meering, I think that's an example of a more realistic alternative than something like offshore breakwaters, which, I realize Dr. Weischer is looking to be thorough, but that's, you're not putting a breakwater in New York State waters. It's not something the applicant has control over. So, exhausting or evaluating alternatives, that's a more reasonable example. Should the revetment be located farther landward than it's proposed right now? These are the questions that I think the board has to answer, or ask, I should say. The applicant has to answer them.
And certainly the interaction of the sea to the break wall, wherever it is going to be, in time. Okay, any other questions? So we move.
Just on my first question, if you could address.
The vinyl?
Yeah, because you're close to the wetlands and you're I don't know what the hydrology would be affected, or.
I think it's I think it remains to be seen if you could run that length of sheet pile purely with a vibratory hammer and not need to excavate it. Obviously, if you were going to excavate for it, you'd be hard to imagine not excavating or impacting the wetlands from that excavation. In terms of what its long-term impact is, that is one of the challenges of erosion control structures in general. Coastlines are dynamic. Exactly how this structure is going to interact with the shoreline over time is variable. It's going to be determined by the weather. It's going to be determined by the daily interaction of this structure. It's going to be determined by if and how much the beach lowers seaward of it, bringing the Napeague Bay shoreline closer to the structure on a regular basis. It makes it very hard to say definitively. There's a range of possibilities. That wetland could get filled in more. It could get filled in until it starts kind of digging out and scouring out, and that wetland could end up drowning eventually and losing sediment. The coastal processes are dynamic. They're a product of the wind and the tides and extreme, or severe, I should say, weather events.
I'm good. Thank you. Is there anybody in the public that would like to address this application?
I think you're good, Brian.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
How are you, Joe? believe you're sworn in already.
I am, but I did have a question about swearing in. What is the actual repercussions when somebody's not telling a true statement to the board?
Oh, thank you.
We'll move on from that, Chairman, if you wish not to answer. I am curious, so my father had yielded me an extra 3 minutes. Is that acceptable for this meeting?
Excuse me?
My father already had yielded me 3 minutes back in January for the January meeting.
Proceed.
All right, that's fine. Board, Joe Karpinski, Bayview Avenue, from the oldest homeowning family, well, oldest surviving homeowning family on Bayview Avenue, predating urban renewal. That being said, I've given you guys an outline there with the table of contents. There's a lot of information, and I will try to go through each and every one of it as quickly as possible, though I do want to start. Nobody has mentioned tonight that rocks are prohibited in this area, so why would we put rocks in a prohibited area? Just like geocubes, prohibited as well, but they're there. If there were ever rocks put there, what would be the liability insurance for the rocks, considering the fact the town still owns 2 properties in front of this property, one being a nature preserve, one being an open recreational facility. The other thing would be the town owns 577 to the west of this property, a CPF-owned lot. That is for all 30,000 people to use this area for public access. If a new home is going to be built on stilts, it's already in imminent peril and it needs a rock revetment. Well, that seems logical. Okay, the town already discouraged development in this area. You can go back to the 2021 meeting when they tried to reclaim the road, very neighborly when they tried to reclaim the middle of the road, and they wanted to reclaim that 15 feet of the unimproved road. That being said, if the septic is to be built, it's supposed to be on the abandoned road of Beechwood. There to this date still has not been any town board produced resolution since the town board under Town Code 232 1-60 Section D, they are the jurisdiction over this road, and easements need to be granted to the town of East Hampton, and abandonments are approved by the town of East Hampton, the town board specifically. There's never been a town produced resolution either for the actual easement, though it does show up in the 1978 deed, which you have. The cover page of this, the narrative, seeks to remove these geocubes as soon as the variances and NRSPs are issued. I'm confused, guys. I mean, that seems like somebody's giving you a bribe. They're holding our road hostage to get what they want, and they're denying our rights willfully, knowingly, continuously for 2,050 days now since the work commenced. It's 1,777 days since the town told them to remove the structure from the roadway. It is 1,337 days that First Coastal got a letter, 30 days or face legal action. If you want to follow Town Code 255-10-50, you should see how many years in prison would be if that town actually followed through with that, and the fines. That being said, that'd be over 600 years already, 653 and a half to be exact today. If you want to follow urban renewal and penalties and violations for not removing any bit of the structure, it's 10 years in prison with the fines that go with that for penalties and violations. But we'll go back in history to the 70s when this board, the ZBA from the East Hampton Star articles, they said in 1972, this area was 100% wetlands. And I already gave you guys those aerials, my own personal aerials that are Long Island aerials from an actual plane going over, not Google, not the GIS maps, not anywhere else in the world. They're my own personally obtained copies. Besides that, then the road was being blocked in March of 1973 by Hank Spear of the Baymen's Association with a group of teenagers. They were stopping the wetlands. The problem with that was being developed. The problem with that was at the end of the day, what happened was the town board said, we can't buy every wetland in the world. So they allowed the first home to come here, the 5th home on this block. That would be 114. When 117 was going to be developed, well, first also I want to tell you, the town board being the jurisdiction in 1977, I gave you the article from the East Hampton Star when they changed Hollymere to A, B, and C. That being said, the applicant's addendum states the home is a pre-existing, non-conforming property. The East Hampton Star article from February 9th, 1978 is the ZBA determination on that about the wetlands and the constraints and the variances. That being said, we can do this continuously, but this is an unimproved road that's 30 feet wide. It's going to be unimproved continuously. When you've been on the road, remember, Johan, you took your pictures and everything. Where that asphalt is currently, there's never going to be asphalt after that spot. Since the town bought the area of wetlands at 96, the DEC is already aware of all the other wetlands in the area. There's never going to be asphalt developed on this road. So who knows how much the road will be developed in the future. Also in Mr. Matthews' memo, he had said that this property, well, as soon as 1994, they were coming and they were going for dune restoration. Au contraire, mon frere. In 1972, the East Hampton Town Justice Course document that you have, the father got caught for filling in the wetlands. Now remember, these were wetlands, guys. These were 100% wetlands, and they're filling it in. One could almost say a determination, if you're filling in the wetlands and taking them away, you're taking away your natural protection. We don't want our natural protection taken away. And I told this board back in 2019, 2019 with this geocube structure. Someday they would come back and say that after I've said they're going to suffocate the wetlands, they don't exist. And sure as anything, Rick Whalen for Mr. Greco's other property in the wetlands here, he came back to the town board on December 15, 2022 and stated, these are nothing more than upland woodlands. I'm sorry, guys. That's not what it is. Throughout all these filings, the applicant states that this outweighs any other ancillary impacts. So our rights are just invalidated. 30,000 people's rights. Everybody who's on that road, our rights to access that beach, invalidated. And they told you already, if you say no to this, they're going to keep it blocked. Don't worry, we'll get to the town violations of town code that haven't been administered. And don't worry, the town of East Hampton was already sent letters of enforcement 1,209 days ago on November 12th of 2020. I know, because my name's one of the names on them. Multiple homeowners. This is an urban renewal road. On an urban renewal road, if 2 or more homeowners are against anything, guess what? It doesn't happen. I'm sorry, not homeowners, any owner. Any owner. Doesn't matter if you own land, a home, whatever it may be. Nothing is supposed to happen whatsoever. Now you're telling me, besides all of this, they told you that they lost 40 feet in 2017 and 2018, but the father claimed after Sandy he lost 40 feet. In the report that you guys have, it says all these different things of, well, they've lost 50 feet in 20 years. I believe Mr. Matthews' exact words were that they've lost 5 feet a year since the structure's been in place. So that's 5 feet a year, 25 feet is what he wrote. So we have 80 feet right there. The other side with the old memo that was given by Aaron Tertullian for the other property back on June 11, 2019, he says, oh, they lost 41 feet in one storm and the erosion is 8 feet a year, but then it's 3.3 feet a year. It's 3.1, it's 3.6. It's anything we want at any time to make our story sound amazing. That being said, you have multiple pictures from me showing you the water's edge of the road since 2014. There's a rock in the middle. Now, I can't do rock in a post anymore because the post is gone, but you guys might remember that one from years ago. And don't remember, guys, we've been doing this so long. It's 35 when this started. I'll be 41 tomorrow. 2,050 days. I'm getting really tired of coming to see you, though you're lovely people. At the end of the day, Aaron Tertullian, I gave you his memo from 1987. Don't worry, guys. When they build a seawall or static structure, that was given to the town board in August of 2021 by Kevin McAllister of Defend H2O. They are not built to protect the beach, which is seaward of the structure. So I've lost the beach for 5 years. I've lost my access. I've been denied. And now you're telling me 25 more years? So the rest of my life, it's gone. So a new home can be built in an area that the town's already said. The planning department says they discourage it. The planning board says they discourage any more development here. You guys already denied the previous applications. And at the end of the day, well, you do have one from 1978. We don't have to discuss that aerial because I believe that Mr. Tertullian said that the GIS map, and he corrected where everything was on that from 1978. This is a non-ADA compliant structure in the middle of our road. It's non-ADA compliant completely and utterly. It's being reviewed by the Department of Justice currently. As of December, they also are aware that the rocks are coming in. That being said, there's the second row behind. There wasn't any plans that had the second row in the first place. And then you'll see the plans go through the years, and magically it's 2018, there's nothing here in the road. Then in 2020, they're gonna have, when they're gonna modify it, oh, Bayview Avenue's 30 feet again, and we're gonna remove it from our 15 feet of this side. Then you get back to 2023, the last one that went to the DEC in June of 2023, and what happened with that? It's gone again, and we're doing this, and those what they call dead man queues, now they exist, guys. Wow, we just breathed them into existence, and now they're here when they weren't here. So that's allegedly about 10 to 18 feet across the whole structure, which they were only allowed to put 117 bags. So that's more bags than they were allowed to be put in the road already. They also want to state, the applicant stated in his addendum that this happened in 2018 at 0 feet mean high water. This has been passed to the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of State, who've never received anything from it. You also have a photo of the red line of demarcation from the Army Corps of Engineers website. It goes right through the front door of the current home that's there. So approximately 93% of the geocubes are already outside of that. And they never gave any permission for any of these cubes, and they have no applications in front of them for the future. That being said, once again, we know about all the letters that were sent to open up the road, and they're saying that they're going to refuse. And even Mr. Matthews, in his own letter, he wrote, irrespective of our rights, and then he continued on, but we have a legal right of pedestrian right of access over this area, and they're telling you they're intentionally keeping this here. The town board never signed off on this road being blocked. It's a violation of Town Code 91, letter G, letter H, Town Code 255-429, 255-10-50, 141-14, 232, and they all need to be adhered to. And there's, once again, the penalties and violations under 232 and 255. Your police, Marine Patrol, code enforcement, and fire marshals have all been asked to do their job and have not done anything yet. In regards to the other things, I also want to let you know that they were issued notice of violations that are in there that I obtained through a FOIL request from the DEC. It's in front of the DEC. It has been responded to from the applicants or their agents, and is also going to be going through the remediation process. So why would we continue forward with anything now when we're going to see what has to happen with the DEC? And until they do what they're going to be told to do for remediation, I don't know what it's going to be. Will it be the road? Will it be every cube coming out? Will it be sand dumped? I don't know. But at the end of the day, they need to go through remediation first before they'll ever be granted another permit from the DEC. So why would you guys move forward with that at all, to even consider this? Once again, for a structure that's prohibited in this area, that shouldn't be here at all. And once again, our rights are willfully, knowingly, continuously denied. That being said, I gave you a series of applications at the end where it goes back and forth between father and son signing the documents, and the only one who ever signed any document, which First Coastal gave in 2018, was the father saying that he was the trustee of the trust. This might be a minor thing, but to me, I find it to be very important, considering from the own addendum, Mr. Greco had stated, or the principal owner of the LLC, I guess we're supposed to say now, the addendum states that, oh, we entered into contract on this date, yet they were applying to the DEC as the owner, and their name is written there, and their address in Central Park West as the owner of this property before they were. And the deeds weren't signed until August, and they weren't filed officially until September of that year. So I find it very suspect that everything came back to you guys, even the previous ZBA applications, to keep this entire thing open, and you have the letters in full there, and continuously with all of that. And one final point, when they built the fence on top of it, which we've known about, and they also have the ramp that is there, they said that they had done this work, and you have the full letter from Whalen Filer, Matty Navalis, specifically, that it was all done. When Russell Young came and issued them a violation on April 27th, that was 3 days, April 27, 2019, 3 days after the town told them to remove the structure immediately from the road. It wasn't done at the beginning. I also gave you my pictures that I sent to Kevin Kispert at the Permits Division of the DEC when they wanted to know what was going on here, when I said, what is going on and why is our road blocked? I've been fighting this for a long time. There's no structure like this that should be here. It has decimated our beach, decimated our area, and continuously we're denied our rights and access. I've already told you how long I've been here for, and you guys have seen me for a lot of things, but continuously, whether it's this one or any of the other ones, I'll stay constant with it. There shouldn't be anything here. And if that septic system's going in a road that they didn't properly give up in the first place, that has to go back to the town board immediately. So that needs to be found out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, one more thing, if I could. I'd like that the board consults with your counsel to keep the public record open for comment, or the written comments for the 2 weeks that would continue, as we know that the applicants and their agents would be giving probably any response to these comments, and we would like our own ample time to refute any response and comments from them in the future, or anything that they give to you.
We will consult counsel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to address this application?
Sworn in, ready, right? Yeah, so I'm here from the perspective of wanting to hear what's going on because I really want beach access. I live on Bayview Avenue. Before I bought my property, I checked with the town attorney, was told that that is a private road, and
Were you sworn in?
Earlier.
yeah,
Yeah, he was.
Sworn in earlier.
I'll do it again.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
For the other hearing.
What's your name
State your
again?
name again.
Steve Odesser.
Steve.
Thank you.
So anyway, I really want beach access. I've spoken to a lot of the neighbors on the block, at least 11, including me, feel the exact same way. At least 9 of those are represented by the attorney who's primarily been engaged by Matthew Emirati. Neither Matthew or his attorney were here today, but just want to be very clear that the vast majority of the homeowners on the block are opposed to this plan. In the meantime, though, the geocubes are still there. They've been there impeding our access for all this time. And what I really like, and I don't know if this has anything to do with the group of people here, but find some way to get us beach access as soon as possible. And I just have to check my notes, but I know that last fall, the town board instructed the town attorney to file for a declaratory judgment in Suffolk County Court, stating that the cube structure is an illegal structure. To the best of our knowledge, they haven't filed for that judgment. If there's anything people here can do to help with that, it'd be very much appreciated by me and the other folks on the block who want beach access, or anything else that can be done to get the access. But those cubes are in our way. I know there's a plan that's ideally supposed to provide us access, but I'm not an expert at this, and the people that we've hired to take our position on this, I think agree with what I heard from the planning board, which is that it's not going to help. It's really going to make things worse. So I'll just kind of summarize again that me and people that I speak to, the majority of people on the block are A, opposed to this, and B, want our beach back.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Matt, is anybody on the phone or online?
Yes, we have one caller holding.
Okay, Lyman.
And I'm going to unmute last four digits. 4049. You are live.
Matt, is anybody on the phone or online?
Okay, and caller, you're going to have to mute whatever device you're listening on and just talk on the phone, please.
4049. You are live.
Hi. Hello?
Okay, and caller, you're going to have to mute whatever device you're listening on and just talk on the phone, please.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, please announce yourself.
Hi, good evening. My name is Randy Odesser. I am the wife of the person that just spoke, Steve Odesser. And
Ma'am,
I've been listening.
I have to swear you in, ma'am?
No.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes. Proceed.
Okay. Hi. So my concern listening to a lot of this is that, the rock revetment seems to be protecting the property of the individual homeowner, and I just want to reinforce that it seems like it does not protect the rights of everybody else on the block, and it seems very, very one-sided. That I completely support that you should have the right to protect your home, but not at the expense of every single person on the block that would like to have beach access and some sort of beach to be able to enjoy as one of the major resources of the street.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Zero additional callers. Thank you.
We have somebody coming to the podium. Hi.
Lee Nadell, Bayview Avenue.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. I just wanted to reiterate that my family, full-time residents here, 2 little kids, go to school, would love beach access. Part of the reason we bought on the road was we were sort of promised this would be dealt with. Obviously, it hasn't yet, and that's fine. I certainly don't know the intricacies the way that many people do. I also just would like to state that I don't want to see anyone lose their home, but I also think that the needs of the entire block need to be considered. Hopefully there's a compromise of some kind, but I would like to also move forward with a solution that gives us beach access because, frankly, I think we're entitled to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, just give me a second.
I'm Brian.
All right, council, at this point, We have to, maybe you,
No, I did.
Brian, oh, come on up. Let's go,
And I
Brian.
have a couple of questions for Brian when he's done talking. I'll go for it now. You want to go first?
No, go ahead
Okay.
if you have a question.
We've spoken for a very long time now on the geocubes and the revetment.
Correct.
But also before us tonight is a 70.6-foot variance and 82.1-foot variance for a residence and decking. And based on the standards in the code, I'd really just like you to demonstrate to this board how is the appropriate scale and location for the constraints of the property, and that the variances are the minimum necessary. And Brian, how would you justify, for the record, the pyramid variances?
Okay, I can read from our memo if you'd like to do that.
Yeah.
We do address each one of the variances in that
like it on the
memorandum.
record.
So if you
That's
just
why I asked.
give me an opportunity to turn to that there. So the first general variance standard, right, is whether or not, and it's, I think it's important to start out with, believe it or not, an agreement with the statement that Brian Frank made. This is a constrained property, certainly. There's not a conforming location to put just about anything. So when you come onto a property like this, much like the property that from 149 Mulford that was before you earlier, relief from this board is going to be necessary. So when you look for, it's a balancing test, as this board knows, as you deal with it every week, every day, generally, with the applications that become before you. So when you're talking about the variances of 70 feet, whatever, 80 feet, whatever they are for the house, for the septic, what have you, the first thing that you look at is you weigh, does the benefit, the grant of the variance, does the benefit to the applicant outweigh any detriment to the health, safety, welfare of the community or the town as a whole? Here, certainly, there is an incredible benefit to relocating the house. I understand it's being knocked down. I'm not trying to be fast and loose with words. We're not trying to imply that we're picking up the house. It's a new house. So, but it is a house. Marginally, it's a nominal increase, as Brian noted. But it's being retreated. I think it's 78 feet landward from where it is right now, to probably the most landward location when you have all of the other improvements that have to go on the property. There is certainly a benefit to having that done. When you look at the application, when you look at the house and you look at the application as a whole. Right now, you have a house that is pre-existing, non-conforming. It moves the house into a more conforming location, which is something that this board is always looking to do. The relocation of the house allows for the septic to be upgraded, which is certainly something in this area and anywhere in the town. This board, the planning department and the town board in adopting the change in the code is always looking to do. And it takes the house for revetment or not, although the revetment is a key component on this because it's the only thing that's going to serve any adequate long-term protection given the rate of erosion here, is taking the house and moving it in a more landward location that's going to take it out of, basically significantly out of harm's way. All you have to do is, we don't have to go through the photos, everybody knows them, instinctively, is if you're standing here, turn to the east. You see the house in the middle, you see the one house in the middle of the water. You see 157 Mulford and 153 Mulford half in the water. This is exactly what we're trying to avoid here, what the applicant is rightfully trying to avoid, and frankly, what this board and the town and the planning department should all be working to avoid. It's not just an impact to the applicant there, it's a benefit to the town to make sure that that doesn't happen. So that's the first standard, right? The next one is whether or not it's the minimum necessary.
Correct.
So given the constrained lot, once you're never going to be able to move it completely into a conforming location, what you have to show is that you've done all that you can to move it back and move it into as conforming location as possible. And we believe that we've done that. And we can have Chris Gaddy get up and talk about why it was designed the way that it was, if you have any particular questions on that, but it is referenced extensively in our memorandum of law, pages 25, 26, there's that whole statement, that whole section right there. But could you have a few feet shaved off the house, an incremental change? That's not really what we're looking for. You're looking for a house that's appropriate for the area, that moves back as far as possibly can from the sidelines, from the seaward location, and that's exactly what we do here. Does the relocation of the house change the character of the neighborhood? Well, it certainly does not. The house is less than 10% larger. If you looked at it, once it was built, you wouldn't even notice that it was a different size house. So it's certainly not going to change the character of the neighborhood, a house that is pretty much exactly the same size as it is right now. Is the request self-created? Importantly, this isn't a determinative factor. If you find something is self-created, it's not a basis in and of itself for denying any variance, as the board hears all the time. But in this instance, it's not. It's nature created, unfortunately, exacerbated by growings to the east and the fact that this area, for a number of different reasons, has exacerbated erosion. That fact is not really up for debate, I don't think. So the need to relocate the house, the need to have it in a more conforming location, can not be deemed a self-created hardship. Can the relocated house be achieved by any other method? No. I mean, there's the code, the restrictions are the restrictions. There's no way to do this without seeking relief from this board. So an area variance is the only way to go. Are the variances substantial? If you look at numbers in the abstract, sure, but that's easy to do on any application. Is it, X percent, X amount of feet, but that's not really, I would submit, the appropriate way to look at it. Is it substantial in the context of what it is now? Remember, this is a non-conforming house as it is. What is it now versus what is it going to be? I think that's a substantial number you should look at, not what it's going to be if this was a blank slate. If this is a blank slate, it's a harder sell, so to speak. But here you have to take the substantial relocation back, and that's the number you should look at to show that the variances that we're asking for are in fact not substantial. They're the minimum necessary. And so I think, and the last one is, will it have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental area? And we submit, again, houses, absolutely not. There's a construction protocol. It's going to be protected by retaining walls to make sure that all the improvements the septic are all protected. It's going to be, all of the things that you necessary to protect a house, make sure it has the upgraded septic, everything that's going to be needed to make sure that this house in this location, which is, again, already there in a less conforming location, there's no impact associated with the house now. Making it more conforming, more landward, is certainly not going to have any impact.
Now, in terms of the retaining wall, what is the purpose of it, first of all, and how will it be installed? Because on the western boundary, this wall will extend more than 7 feet above the grade along the property line, and it will be between 2 to 7 feet from the freshwater wetlands. So how would you address that?
I would think that's probably much like most people here. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a contractor, so I wouldn't want to speak to that, but I can certainly turn it over to Sean to answer that question.
Oh, that would be great.
He's the expert, he's the one who designed it, who could really go through the protocol. But unless you have any other questions for me just on that at the moment.
Just one other question.
Sure.
There is a staircase to the beach that was constructed without a building permit along the western property line. Has it been removed, or?
I believe it
there's
has.
an intention to have it removed, but has it been removed?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Butler?
I'm curious about one. Brian, at the very beginning of this whole thing, you said there was a 30% reduction of the property.
I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
You said your applicant you're providing a 30% reduction of their property.
In the usable portion of the property, because, yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. It really is, because when it's the 35-foot landward, not relocation, but construction of the proposed revetment from where the geocubes exist right now. It's not really part, it's part of your property, but it's not really going to be part of your property anymore, because it's going to be taken up by that revetment. So that's where that number came from.
The lot size is still going to be the same as it is today.
Exactly. So, Sean, did you want to?
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Sean Buckner, Delander Enders. Sean. Yes, so the question was about the installation, about the sheet piles. That is more of a contractor means and methods. I understand Brian's point about the vinyl and potentially hitting rocks. While you're vibrating, there's an opportunity, if one does crack, they can shift it slightly. presumably towards the property line to try to avoid some kind of issues to that.
How will it be installed?
Vibration.
Okay.
Yeah, there's two methods to either drive sheet piles or vibrate them. I would say the vibrating would be the least impactful. Basically, the extreme case, if they keep hitting rock, we could provide an alternate spec for a steel sheet pile, which is also commonly used, and would achieve the same benefits to the applicant and avoid some of the constructability issues.
Thank you.
One other thing I just wanted to touch on that Brian had touched on was the difference between the geocubes and the revetment. He did touch on the slope being able to absorb, it kind of doesn't create a vertical wall that redirects the forces straight down, but also with a revetment, there is, void space that does actually absorb forces rather than just redirecting. So the fundamental difference between the two is that's a flat wall, both vertical, but also that's solid, wrapped in plastic, and doesn't absorb any of the forces. So it's the combination of the slope that's not as, it's not just hitting a flat wall, but it also has void spaces that actually absorbs and dissipates how much is redirected. So there is actually a net negative in the redirection of forces.
And your feeling is that the 4-foot buried of the toe is going to help stabilize this entire revetment? Right?
Yes.
That's the key engineering moment there that happens, is that buried 4 feet.
Exactly. The toe stone is very important to the revetment along with the total weight per foot. And one other thing while we're on the topic, we are, to your point, bringing the revetment back 35 feet from where the geocubes are. So I would say, a lot of the conversation has been about the beach access and whatnot. Obviously, there's no beach where the geocubes are right now. So pulling back the revetment 35 feet does allow opportunity for, one, beach access, and two, it gives, theoretically, if we're going by the 3 to 4 foot per year erosion rate, that gives 10 years for natural forces to, still take their path before the revetment really, we erode all the way to the revetment, and then we start having this conversation about adverse effects and what a lot of the conversation has been about tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, are you okay?
Well, I wasn't sure if the board or the members of the board, I'm sure, did you want to get up and rebut? Did you? Okay. So I know there was a lot said here. I'm not really sure how the board wants to continue at the moment, but I thought there was just one important statement that I know, Mr. Chairman, you had raised it first, and that was the first question, I think, and I think if I'm misquoting, I hope I'm not, that you posited to Brian Frank to say, did they do enough, did the applicant do enough to show, enough of a job to show that the revetment is not just protecting their property, but is protecting the neighbors and the wetland? I think that was the question you posited.
The environmental aspect of it.
Understood. And I think it's important to note respectfully that I think that inquiry is a little bit off. The revetment, the purpose of the revetment is very clearly, I don't think there's any point in hiding out, is to protect your property, right? And every right to try and do that. And that's the principal design component to it. But I think it's not necessarily accurate to the burden on an applicant in any context, a revetment, wetland variance for a shed or a pool or anything else, is not to show that you're protecting the neighbors and protecting the wetland. The burden on an applicant is to show that you're not adversely impacting those areas. And I think it's a slight distinction, but I think it's an important one in reviewing this application going forward, to keep that distinction in mind.
Well, I think the distinction, though, is meant to look at environmental impact.
Right.
Yes.
No, I agree, but I think it's the burden is to not adversely impact, but not to show that you're going overtly and protecting them. So like I said, I think it's more than a semantical distinction. I think it's an important distinction to make about where the burden lies.
Appreciate it.
And I think Member Marion, you had a question about why it was, or it was raised in your colloquy with Brian about why the revetment was where it was. Could it be further back, right?
Yeah, it was just
And I
curious.
think the revetment is in line with the shoreline for the properties, along that lie to the east and west. If it moved it back, all it would do was exacerbate. I mean, the experts can talk about it a little bit more, but all it would do is just exacerbate that erosion and push that shoreline back even further, so it would get further and quicker, so it would get to that line of where the revetment is. So I think that's one reason why it is proposed to be where it is.
I'm sorry, could you just clarify when you said it would get there further and quicker? I mean, you've been saying that there's a certain progression of erosion each year, I guess. So, the question was, is it 10 years before the water starts to directly engage with the revetment, or is it 15 years? Or I don't know.
I don't know that I can adequately answer that, but I think what you do is you look at, it's not, the rate of erosion is not anything that's perceived. I think there was a lot of discussion. Is it 5 feet? Is it 8 feet? It's not, the erosion it's documented over decades to show that on average, some years it's 8 feet, some years it's less, but on average it's four something feet a year in this area that the town has in a number of EAFs, TAMs, and final decisions on properties along here. I've read them all. I recognize that this is the most erosion-prone area in town, and that's for the last few decades, that's the rate it's been eroding at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, board, we have some business to do regarding the secret process. As it relates to, we have a submitted EAF Part 1 that has been submitted, and at this point, the board needs to decide, make a determination whether to list it as an unlisted action. So, council, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, not really, except just to explain to everyone here, and I had a brief moment before the meeting to mention this to the applicant's attorney. At this point, the board is being expected to consider and offer up for a vote, a resolution, simply at this point to classify the proposed action as an unlisted action pursuant to SECRA. And then additionally, the language that I have included in this proposed resolution is just that the zoning board is reserving the right to conduct a coordinated review pursuant to SECRA. That's the only step that
we have at this time.
That we have at this time in front of us, yeah.
Okay. Board, do you have any questions regarding the listing of this application as an unlisted action?
I do not.
No, I don't.
Okay, therefore, do we have a motion to classify this application as an unlisted action? Well, I'll make that motion, if you will. So make a motion.
You're going to make a
Motion to classify this application as an unlisted action.
I'll second it.
Oh, okay, you didn't have to.
Yep, that was. Right.
Okay, I
Did we
concur.
want to,
Nope, we agree as a board. Then we have to read the resolution into the record, correct?
Yeah, you can. You can, just because it hasn't been.
We're voting first,
So
so I
therefore-
concur as well.
Therefore, I'll read, we have a resolution before us already. So therefore, in the application of Nicholas Greco, Suffolk Tax Map number 300-84-1-3.1, whereas the Town of East Hampton Zoning Board of Appeals received a complete application including a short form environmental assessment form, EAF Part 1, on or about January 5th, 2024, requesting a natural resource special permit pursuant to 255-420 variance from 255-385 coastal erosion overlay district regulations of the town code, and several area variances from 255-1172 and 255-1110 to demolish an existing 1 and 2-story residence and sanitary system and construction of a new 1,885 square foot 2-story residence and roughly 108 linear feet of rock revetment erosion control structure on a parcel of land containing tidal and freshwater wetland beaches and surface waters, and whereas the location of the proposed action is 117 Bayview Avenue, Amagansett, and more particularly described on the Suffolk County Tax Map as Suffolk Tax Map Number 300-84-1-3.1, and whereas the proposed action requires the following discretionary approvals by the ZBA, several area variances, a variance to construct a coastal erosion structure where the construction of a new erosion control structure is prohibited by the town code, and C, an NRSP special permit, and whereas the ZBA has identified the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation as an involved agency, and now therefore be it resolved, the ZBA classifies the proposed action as an unlisted action pursuant to SECRA and the regulating provisions of 6 NYCRR Part 617, and resolved, the ZBA reserves the right to conduct a coordinated review pursuant to SECRA. Does anybody have any questions?
I will correct.
The motion-
I misspelled 2 of the 5 board members' names in one way, so I apologize, and I'll correct that. Sorry, Ed and Jane. I did it fast there at the end. Go ahead.
So therefore, I make a motion to adopt the resolution to classify the proposed action as an unlisted pursuant to SECRA.
Second.
Concur. And along with that is to identify the Department of DEC as an involved agency. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so for clarification for the board and really for the applicant's agent and the other people in the room, the next step that the board will have to determine, because this is an unlisted action, so coordination is an option but not required, is whether the board would like to do that. We're not going to have that discussion right now tonight. We've been inundated with information. We're not going to have that discussion publicly. The board is going to be receiving advice from council on that point later on. So our choice, or our offer to the applicant's agent in terms of scheduling is we would be prepared to adopt a resolution to that effect as early as the next meeting. We would be then continuing the hearing until next week unless you would ask for a different date. And we kind of discussed this briefly, but the way that myself and we've been discussing this with outside counsel envision this going is it can simply be at the next meeting just deciding that point and resolving to that effect. You don't need to present anything else. Nobody else needs to present anything else. At that point, we are then going to choose another date certain, depending on whether coordination or not is the way that the board would like. We would then be choosing a date at least 30 days in advance of, or in the future to provide for that.
Next week.
Correct. So if the board is okay with it, and that's the plan.
To schedule.
So at this point tonight, we're stating that we are continuing the hearing
That's correct.
until March 12th. And then on March 12th, this is the only item that we will be taking up or resolving to
Whether or not
that
it's going to be
effect.
coordinated or uncoordinated.
Correct.
That's correct.
And on March 12th, we will be, again, setting a second continued
Correct.
date at somewhere in the 30-day range or shorter.
That's perfectly fine, yeah.
Okay. I'm only really asking him if he's okay with this, Mr. Matthews. I don't know if anybody else. I'm thinking it's as long as you're okay with it and we're okay with it. Yes.
Just for the sake of clarification, Jeremy Samuelson, Planning
You
Department.
swear affirm to tell the truth, the
I
whole truth,
swear.
nothing but the
Thank
truth.
you, sir. Just for clarification for members of the audience, is the record open for submissions to general members of the public, or is there any limitation on who could provide additional commentary or information for the file?
Good question. The hearing is open. The public hearing is open. The record is
We are
open.
leaving the hearing and the public open.
Yes.
So
It's
we're gonna
just
see-
that this will be an item, and because this is, we're trying to, in the interest of everybody's time, and we don't want to, this will not take us longer than a week. Next week is technically a work session of the board because you have noticed this hearing, and if you're comfortable with that date and we're comfortable with it, we're going to be offering that discussion item, that resolution up for adoption. To the extent that members of the public come next week, it's not the appropriate time to speak as if it's a continuation of tonight. There will be another date. But if between now and next week there are written comments, those will be included in the record.
Seems
Is that-
fair.
Yes, okay.
So we need a motion on the,
Okay.
on the floor. Ed, you want to make a motion?
I'm going to make a motion for continuation until March 12th, right?
Yes.
And then in the application of 117 BVA LLC at 117 Bayview Avenue, Amagansett, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-84-1-3.1, I'd like to make a motion to continue this hearing until March 12th, 2024.
Second.
I concur.
Concur. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I already.
The file got bigger, huh? You couldn't carry, and then, and this one.
I know.
You could take your cobbles. You could take your cobbles with you.
Cobbles for everybody. Cobble, it's like Oprah. Everybody gets the cobble.
You don't want to leave those cobbles?
It won't fit in the file.
Have to wait until it's actually posted.
Yeah. I mean, he might give it back. I think he wanted it.
Thank you, Sean.
Really, I'll probably get, I'll make sure that I get one.
I have one last one. Brian didn't get one. I only had 7.
Brian.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why.
Okay.
Come back anytime.
But then my father only told me that you gave it.
Yeah, no, I saw him saying that. Did you submit a digital copy yet? Okay, and it's exactly everything.
Let's get done.
Okay, it is late.
Let's get done.
Good night.
All right, move on to
we
the
gotta-
next agendas.
Okay.
We can wrap this up quickly.
What's next?
We have the minutes approval of draft minutes of February 27, 2024.
I would like to make a motion to approve the draft minutes from February 27th of 2024 for the East Hampton Town Zoning Board of Appeals.
Second.
I concur.
I concur. Thank you. Could you all take it outside the room? Thank you.
Get the hell out.
We move into the resolutions. We have Michelle Cohn at 89 Marine Boulevard, Amagansett, Suffolk Tax Map number 300-176-8-5.3.
We're going to have to hold that again. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Have the whole
I
cone.
thought I didn't
worries.
see it. I didn't see it.
I
Next
saw
we
that
have-
comment.
Its agent already knows, but that is.
We've got plenty of time.
We have Lynn Eichner on
did it.
2 occasions, 39 Fairview Avenue and 55 Fairview Avenue. Who handled these cases? Is
Not me.
that you?
What? Lynn
Eichner?
Eichner. Yeah.
You want to read
What
these
about
both?
it? Sure.
You deal with these both?
Okay. You want to talk about it? Okay, Lynn Eichner, 39 Fairview. Can I do them both at the same time?
These were the
55
bikini
Avenue.
wetlands, right?
These, yes, yes. These are 2 undeveloped properties with new houses going on, and the modification was pretty de minimis. It was for a change of the windows, some of the windows on the house, nothing else really changed, and none of the other circumstances have changed on the property. Can I make a motion on both at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay, so make a motion for Lynn Eichner at 39 Fairview Avenue in Montauk, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-19-8-14.1, and for Lynn Eichner at 55 Fairview Avenue, Montauk, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-19-8-15 and 16 to approve the modification resolution as written.
Second.
I concur.
I have to abstain because
concur.
it
Thank you.
preceded my time
Okay.
on the board.
And who did comment?
Yeah, well, that was, yeah, I can do that one too. Okay, this is the one, if you recall, it was to take out a condition. There were 2 things changing on the application. There was a buffer, a no-mow zone on a previous approval by a zoning board, and the applicant has requested that we remove the no-mow zone if he, in fact, is not going to build the garage that had been part of that previous approval. This board voted in favor of removing that and approving the modification to remove the garage and the no-mow zone from this application. So for Thomas Comack at 47 South Fulton Street in Montauk, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-28-8-2, make a motion to approve the modification as written.
I'll second it.
Concur?
Abstain.
Concur. Thank you. Next, we have Lori Shemla. If you remember, Lori Shemla was an access, issue where, if I remember, the access was through the basement. It met the town code, the state code and federal code, but did not, town code prohibits that for accessory apartments. The board was denied this 3-2. It's come back to us for a resolution as a stipulation. We read the stipulation. I've read it. I agree with it. I don't know if all the boards agree with it.
I'm dissenting. I think I'm the only one
Okay,
dissenting.
fine. So therefore, I make a motion for Lori Shemla, 460 Further Lane, in Amagansett of Suffolk, tax map number 300-190-1-7.3, to accept the stipulation as written.
I'll second it.
Dissenting.
Stipulation resolution.
Yeah, I would say more like to accept the resolution authorizing the town attorney's office to enter into the stipulation to settle it.
Okay, so concur.
Abstain.
Thank you. Next, we have Gabs Jacks.
About this
Yeah,
one,
I'm
right?
sure we're going to talk about this. Whose was this?
This was mine originally.
Okay. This, go ahead.
I mean, I don't even recall that we, as a board, agreed to settle this particular one. And I think I wrote a couple of weeks ago, I gave you my opinion, Jameson, in a note. I do not agree with the stipulation. I think, and at best, I guess I will be dissenting on it, but I don't recall that this board as a whole agreed to even settle this with the applicant.
Have we had a board, have we had a proper discussion on this?
The last I recall, and it goes back in time, was that more information was going to be given to us, and nothing happened for a while, and the next thing we know, this was happening.
From my point of view, that's a fairly accurate assessment. I know that there was going to be an additional discussion, additional material, and then it was presented that there had been an agreement. I don't feel that I was part of that conversation, that we did come up with that agreement. I have read the resolution as written, and I see what's being offered now. But if you're asking if we had the discussion, I don't remember us having a discussion where we decided.
But I think we were all given the opportunity to go back and take a look at the
That's
files
right.
and try to come up with it. It's your opportunity to talk.
And I think when our
Well-
council sent us the step, how it was going to be written, that was our opportunity to get back to you.
Ed, what's your sense on it?
Yeah, so my feeling is that I did deny it the first time through,
Yeah.
but I am going to approve
Unanimous
it. I'm going to approve it because I think that what got written into the stipulation to me was about as a good a solution as we're going to get on it, and so I'm willing to support it.
Okay, I disagree with that completely. I did, after we got, have had the first discussion, I did look at the hearing again. I did look at our decision again. It was unanimous denial, and I find that this is not at all in keeping with, to just reference the septic system that was offered. I feel that had that discussion at the hearing gone originally where they did offer some mitigation, there would have been other discussion about other factors of it, a buffer, additional revegetation buffer. None of that is in the stipulation. All it is, okay, we'll give them that. And what mitigation was listed in the TAM. When I looked at the TAM, there's almost nothing in there. It's all stock items. So I am in complete disagreement with this, and I will not be approving. And I thought we all have to agree on this.
No, we just have to have a 3 vote.
Okay. You on this, Lauren?
I am not, this way preceded me, my time on the board.
I didn't have a problem with the stipulation.
I agree. I think that if you look at, I don't know, the septic system often offsets some mitigation. I think it does help.
Some.
Yes.
Enough.
Yeah. All right. I think we have.
Okay, so 3 you go.
Okay, so there we go. So we can make a motion then, because it is written. So Ed, you want to make a motion?
Okay, then in the matter of Gabjack's Manor, okay, I'll read it with these glasses. I have Manor, LLC, 155 Westlake Drive, Montauk, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-19-7-28.6. I make a motion to accept the determination as written.
Second.
Dissent.
Concur. Thank you. All right, Vice Chair.
To modify that, take my name off that.
Vice Chair going to make
Did
a
I put
motion?
anybody's name on it?
Wanna make a
I think maybe left it
Oh,
blank.
yeah, that's right.
Oh, you left them blank, that's right.
Forgetting
Fill in the
my
blanks.
Oh, what time is it?
I want to see it if.
Are we going into executive?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, we're going to go into exec.
So I make a motion that we adjourn the zoning board of appeals at 10:11. And I also make a motion that we go into executive session
To discuss legal matters.
to discuss legal matters.
I'll second it.
I concur.
Oh, I concur.
I concur. Thank